Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Even in her dream, a sense of joyful excitement had started to dawn on her. She was dreaming of her husband. John pressed her to him, and it made the girl feel insanely good. So she opened her eyes and slid through the apartment still at dawn. The sun's rays drew on the wallpaper an intricate pattern. She threw back the sheet, allowing it to continue traveling over her naked body. Slayera sat up on the bed and stretched. The sweet theme had finally developed. The illuminating morning chill presented itself. Slayera got up, walked to the bathroom, and turned on the cool shower. She had practiced this for several years now. Hot water used to make it hard to concentrate, take away energy. But this way, it was like a second breath. You come out fresh and full of energy, immediately ready to engage in the day's hustle and bustle. Ahead of her awaits a new day, and in the evening a restaurant or. The girl grinned dinner with her son, and hers too, though adopted. But it was she who had been by his side for 2 years, going to parent-teacher conferences, listening to his revelations about his relationships with friends and teachers. Did she feel like a mom? She was only 3 years older. No, she didn't want to be. Her husband just wanted to give the guy the illusion of marital happiness, so she went along with the game. He got lucky with her. He was 38 when they met. His first wife, Jacob's mother, passed away when he was only 4 years old. The guy often told Clara that he does not even remember what she looked like. The boy was raised by his grandmother Marlo on his mother. She was physically weak, and every year her health was deteriorating. It was enough only for the most basic care of food and clothes for the child. Therefore, Slaga in the person of Jacob got a Terry triplets, which in addition was in the midst of puberty. No one could find a common language with the teenager. Complaints came from teachers and neighbors, and with his stepmother he became friends only years later when he turned into an angry, handsome young man. How she managed it, no one knew, but she was the only one he seemed to obey in public, and John was never able to win his son's trust. And did he want to? He went from one term to the next, and when he came back, he was in the pubs. It was a way of life that finally got to his mother. She died, leaving her negligent son a big house in the center of town. That's where John brought his new wife. At first, Jacob met her in the bayonet. He reminded the girl of the shield in her stomach, of his former self from his pack, the lonely, hungry, angry one. Clara was defiant and implacable with him as well. She was always the leader and considered herself the mistress of the house. That's why she went straight to the bottle in any dispute. Young, sensual, and passionate. She wanted to live only by her own rules and had no pity for the boy. He was in the way. She didn't need him at all. They disliked each other intensely, fought so much that they seemed to fight. She was very much in love with John at the time. She knew of his criminal record and knew he'd never put a stop to it. But the man was as handsome as God, and he was charming and generous. Strong, tall, with big, bright green eyes, a strong-willed chin, a dazzling and snow-white smile. A dandy. Dressed well-groomed. He liked to look after himself in the wild. He played sports, went to the tanning salon. He had enough money for metal ceramics, expensive clothes, restaurants, and women. Clara fell in love with him at first sight. As soon as she saw him in one of the popular night spots in the city, he too could not remain indifferent to the young Smuglyanka. Many people paid attention to her. Seeing her once in a restaurant, the man felt that this time before him is an interesting woman, and she will not be an easy prey. Flexible in an open, short, olive-colored dress, she walked confidently down the hall. She moved easily, smoothly, even though she was wearing high-heeled shoes, carelessly fixing her heavy, deep chocolate-colored hair, smooth as silk. With a look of big eyes snatched in the crowd of men worthy of his attention. Daring, risky, daring such, and did not meet on the way John Marlo. Seeing her, he immediately began the hunt. He himself came to the table where she sat with her friends and glared at her with his eyes. He put an expensive bottle of champagne in the middle. My treat. Trial of strength, he with his low pro-chicken voice, will not be enough, will order more. What's that for? That proudly threw her head down. Clara, we're sitting pretty good. I see you're sitting even better. The man turned around and went to his table. Sofia admired Slaga's friend Sofia. Chill. She gave him a piercing glare. I could smell him a mile away. That cat. Hogarth, yeah, you take after, Sofia giggled. I felt it too. Only you won't, because I won't. At the height of the evening, John and Clara joined together on the dance floor. They were irresistibly attracted to each other. Marlowe could only wonder that his new acquaintance was so confident, so young, and so bright. Her intelligence and grace could be envied by mature women whom John valued so much. At the end of the evening, he was enchanted by the girl. He was afraid to admit to himself that she had hit him right in the heart. The daring, swarthy girl was unlike the ladies he had met before. She was interesting. Among the many charming, intelligent, and beautiful women, she stood out. An inexplicable thrill arose in the soul of the man. He wanted to drown in his relationship with her. John caught himself thinking that all his previous romances were boring. Unremarkable meetings with a slight tinge of sympathy. How many of them had been so evocative of his quiet interest? Dozens, hundreds. In general, John moved only one desire to satisfy sexual hunger and replenish his male collection. By and large, they were ladies for a night, for a week, at best for a month. But Slaga, she attracted her sensuality, her passion, and at the same time was in the border boyfriend. With her you could get drunk, talk frankly, and even get mind-blowing quality sex. I didn't want to part with her. She was looking for strength, such inner confidence that involuntarily there was a desire to obey, trust, give into the hands of this goddess all the reins of love and enjoy. John had seen other beauties like her, but they didn't have the charms that Clara had. He wanted her all the time. Every movement of her gaze was like a volcano of desire, an unparalleled rare trait. He was amazed to find himself admiring her swift gait, the radiant smile, the way she gestured. John realized that an early unexplored feeling had stirred in the back of his mind. It was an attraction. The condition was unusual for him. He was bathed in the cocktail, the excitement, the involvement. He couldn't understand what it was about this girl that attracted him. It was something elusive. He didn't feel a shadow of embarrassment in her presence. He had every fantasy with her. Next to Clara, he was physically aroused, uninhibited and bold. He did not immediately realize that it was his woman. At first he just went to the light, flew to the young girl like a moth. Only later he noticed that he never got bored near her, never thought about business or about someone else. She absorbed all his attention, and she ridiculously came to him with stupid talk about love or pathetic sentimental feelings. Next to her one could be any debauchery, drunken, schoolboyish. John realized that in front of him was a strong personality, and whatever their relationship in the future, he would not be able to possess her completely. The girl would always have her own world hidden from him. Only at will she will open the door to him, but will not let him in completely. Let's get married. He proposed to her a week after we met. So serious, she laughed. Yeah, I think we're right for each other. Or maybe I'm wrong, he asked. Intensely, fought so much that they seemed to fight. She was very much in love with John at the time. She knew. No, it looked like it. Clara nodded and made her way to his lips. John felt himself getting turned on. I'll be yours. The girl slowly backed away from him. If you show class tonight. Clara drilled the man with her velvet brown eyes, and John moved to follow her. Such games thrilled him, boosted his male ego, released his instincts. To my place, he suggested. Let's go. Clara shook her head, and her luxurious hair spread over her round shoulders. Soon, they were speeding by cab through the night city. Entering the rented apartment, Slaga herself led him to the bedroom. The room was in semi-darkness. She turned on only one night lamp. The girl, without false shame, threw off her dress. There was nothing under it. John followed her example. He looked admiringly at her slender young body, then boldly approached her and embraced her. In intimacy, she belonged completely. He was resourceful, then pitching left, then slipping away, then passionate, then indifferent. Always different, always unpredictable. He enjoyed his woman, her animal, magnetism. A look, not arbitrary body movements, atomic size. Next to her, the whole world was just a backdrop for their love. John married her and brought her into the house as a mistress. The new status was to her liking. She enthusiastically took care of repairs and household problems. Marlowe's son was confronted with the fact of his marriage and told to obey Slaga. The teenager circled the newlyweds with a contemptuous look, glared, and locked himself in his room. For a month, he barely spoke to them one syllable, answering questions and avoiding all contact. In time, he got used to it, but in every way he showed his contempt for his newfound mother. And with his father he was cold. Of course, he had no time for his son. During the day, he disappeared on his business, in the evening in the bedroom with his young wife. But the boy's behavior irritated him. One night, when John was asleep, the girl drank champagne in the kitchen. She heard a key turn in the lock. It was Jacob, returning from a nightclub. He walked into the kitchen and saw Clara sitting in just her panties on the windowsill. "Hey you, we need to talk," she started. "I demand basic respect from you. Why don't you go stripper first?" "Who the hell are you to pay attention to you?" Jacob replied. "I'm kind of your mom. You know, Dad's got a new term coming up. He's not gonna let go of his habits. You didn't have time to draw your father here, and you thought you knew everything about everyone. I don't mean that kind of longing. Father had the sea." At these words, Clara jumped up to the teenager and slapped him. "You say that again, I'll bury you, puppy. You don't realize who you're dealing with." I'm the only one who understood Jacob, at first taken aback, then rubbed the sore spot with his hand, and suddenly sharply grabbed Clara by the arms and pinned behind her back, bent her forward. "I'll try to do it again. You're older, but think with your head. Who are you smiling at? I'm taller than you and stronger. I've been fighting for a long time. So get out of here before you get your ass kicked." The guy let the girl go. Wow. A cheeky grin spread across his face. "You're not as easy as you look." She got a kick out of him. "Okay, you surprised me, come to me. Now that you've started, I take my ambition back." Jacob looked at the swarthy, beautiful girl. She was good. The guy decided to use her and tell his father about it. "I'll take you," excitedly, he said. "Take off your clothes." The girl gasped, and he turned on the camera. Jacob approached her and possessed her. In his emerald eyes only hatred shone. Then he left her alone, picked up his things from the floor. He went to his room. He filmed the whole process in his room several times. He watched the video. "So much for the dirt. I'll show my father tomorrow," he decided as he fell asleep. Such inner confidence that involuntarily there was a desire to obey, trust. The guy woke up to someone's hands caressing. His body threw back the sheet. He tried to push her away. Yesterday's contact was for fun. Liar. What a wheezing cunt. Jacob grabbed the girl by the neck and threw her on her stomach. "Where is the father?" he asked. When it was over, "Where did he go?" whispered Clara. "What time is it?" 12 o'clock. Through the open window could be heard the car rumble of people's voices, children's laughter. It was a day off and many people were leaving for the dacha. She got up and went to take a shower. She came back half an hour later. "You hear that? Can you stop walking around the house naked?" Jacob turned to her. "You're your father's value, but to me you're one of 1,000. We'll see about that." The girl glared at him. Together, they stayed in his bedroom until deep into the night. Waking up at 0 o'clock, Jacob went into the kitchen. The house was dark. That's odd. His father never came back. He got worried, then went to his room. It was empty. Jacob woke up Clara. "Father is still gone," he told her. The girl reluctantly got out of bed, fumbled with the sheet, and took the phone from the nightstand. Dialed Marlowe's number several times. No answer, she sighed. Strange, he hadn't set foot in a casino in 3 months. He hasn't been hitting on any chicks yet. I'm on a roll. Come on, get dressed. Let's hit the hot spots. I pulled on a wide sweater and jeans over my naked body. Clara jumped into the driver's seat, pressed the klaxon a few times. Why are you ringing the whole street? Jacob approached and got indignant. Sit down, son. And frowned. Intuition tells me that I need to hurry. The engine roared and the car took off. Drove it just as I loved it. As they say, without brakes. In this case, it was not even in the figurative sense. But we quickly bypassed all the unfortunate places. Marlowe Sr. was nowhere to be seen. There is only one place left. The girl stretched out. And in a couple of minutes they arrived at the police station. Yes, yes, tired nodded the duty officer. Took John on a theft at a jeweler's. You know he's the kind of guy who doesn't stay out long. But Jacob cursed profanely. That's pathological. You're in my hands now. The kid smirked at Syl as promptly as ever. And for me, in general, and on time to go home. Now we'll see him only after the trial and then on big holidays. Marlowe was sentenced to 3 years. He was sent to a high-security colony to serve his sentence. Clara came to see him for a long visit. He was released to a hotel for 24 hours. To her surprise, he first pounced on the food, and then already on her. The girl was standing by the window. He came up behind her and began to caress her neck, collarbones, breasts. The man imperiously turned her to himself, encircled her face with his palms, and completely given over to the power of his feelings, passionately penetrated her mouth. She wrapped her arms around her husband's neck, drawing him to her. Clara felt the pounding of his heart quicken. John covered the girl's body with short, vigorous kisses, freed her from her clothes, picked her up in his arms, and carried her to the bed. Then Clara lay on his shoulder, and he caressed the strands of her lustrous chocolate hair. Why are you cold? Did you find someone else? He asked. Don't talk nonsense, she whispered back. I'm just tired. I'll make up for it. She started kissing his ear, but I recognize my initiative, girl. With you, it's like heaven. He kissed passionately. The girl's flaccid lips. Their dance of love continued until dawn. Marlowe was satisfied. John, we're running out of money with Jacob. What do we do? Clara asked him in the morning. Don't worry, sweetheart. Just don't give your soul to anyone but me for it. Won't you need money? I've got plenty in reserve. Sama told me that you two became friends and bonded, nodded the girl. Hey, you're not sitting with a baby. It's interesting with him. With him, Topalov has the caress of a husband. He did not let her out of bed, but she only dreamed of Jacob. For the first time, the hunter for men's hearts was tired of physical love. Now she longed for the arms of her lover. Being close to him made her slave happy, and she wished to be with Jacob every minute of her life. Meanwhile, her relationship with him was complicated. He slept with his stepmother, but he only looked at her with lust. There was no love in his eyes. He began to tear himself down. She hired tutors for him. The boy's behavior also became more even. He expressed less to those around him, showed patience and loyalty. Perhaps the reason was their sexual games, which drained his energy. He behaved swaggeringly in the bedroom and could brazenly order himself to incarnate into a nurse or a bank director's hotel maid or a school teacher. The guy seemed to enjoy realizing what influence he had over her, and for some reason he wanted to humiliate the girl. Maybe for the fact that she took from him the last favorite person of his father. All of Clara's pride and independence vanished. She was ready to serve her idol every minute, to fulfill any whims, to be a thing for this handsome, strong guy. She was afraid that one day he would leave her, love her for real, and forget about her. Clara realized that she also had a certain power over the guy, over his body, but she never got hold of the young man's soul, no matter how hard she tried. When she returned home from the colony from her husband's house, there was a surprise waiting for her. Jacob put her things in a bag and put her out the door. The girl's heart almost stopped. She beat helplessly at the door with her fists, but he did not open it. Finally, his head showed through the window. "Why are you banging on the door so hard?" Jacob was mad. She flew to the window and reached for it. "Don't you recognize your car? You don't need it anymore. Let me in the house and we'll talk. You're running away now. You'll get me in bed and you'll be the boss again." "No, I won't. Go back to the Decemberist's husband and he'll be sarcastic to the end. Is that how you get jealous? I'm happy. Who do you want me to share with? Will I share you? Will you share with others? Not with my father." The girl figured him out. "That's why you needed me to prove to yourself that you're better. A psychologist came into the bathhouse." "No, you didn't. I don't need you at all. I will live here with a girl young, decent, and gentle. And you're boring. You belong in a whorehouse. I'll broom you out of here. You can't go on without me. You'll ruin the girl's life. Innocence is not your thing. You're just like your father. You just missed him." He confessed. "My little bastard." Clark's eyes filled with tears. "If you command it, I'll do whatever you want. I beg you, open up." There she went again. He closed the window in her face. "I have your father's power of attorney for the money. Without it, you're nothing." Did she yell as loud as she could? "Your blackmail won't work." Jacob's back out on the street. "I'll get by. I'll earn my own money. But leave me alone. Let me breathe clean air. I'm letting you go forever. Live in your father's rented apartment. I don't mind. Just stay away from me." "Jacob, I'll tell my father. He's with you. I don't know what he'll do." She was tearing her hair out of her chest in despair. "Do whatever you want. I don't care, as long as I'm free from your yoke, to live like a normal guy. I don't need your poison of lust anymore." "What are you doing? My boy, how can you do this? I love you more than life. I've torn my soul out. I idolized you. How will you live? My father gave me the money, not you. You're wrong. I've had an account opened for me for a long time. Is there no one to comfort you but me?" The girl, gritting her teeth, grabbed the bag by the handles and dragged it along the ground. Soon, along with a block of dust, she disappeared behind the gates of the house. Jacob breathed a sigh of relief. He knew that if Clara had come in and touched his body, he would not have been able to resist, would have drowned in debauchery again. She drew him in, she gave him intoxicating pleasure, and he dissolved more and more into her. The guy realized that he would never have a life of his own. As long as she was around, he would not notice reality. Only lust and lust took over his soul. Eventually, he would lose his human form and turn into an insatiable animal. 5 years passed. Marlo sat still, and Jacob never heard from her again. Her father tried to track her down from prison, used his connections, but she disappeared, as if vaporized. True, the money from one of Marlo Sr.'s accounts disappeared with her. Jacob. Now it seemed he was completely free. The boy remembered with horror how the first time he had broken down at the mere thought of Clara. The body bored, and the soul rejected the silent image. In time, all passions began to be forgotten, and he began to live an ordinary life. Having finished school and institute, he got a job. His day invariably began with a cup of Americano. Coffee was available on his desk. When Jacob studied the entries in his diary, today he had several articles to write and process. After all, he had been a correspondent for the popular local magazine, Evening Leitsemansk, for a month now. He took a sip of coffee as the computer dipped burned, the drink invigorating. That's when the phone rang. "Jacob, are you in the newsroom?" He heard the voice of an old acquaintance of Holmes and Miranda's father. Yes, for many years she combined her work as a pathologist and part-time police expert. "Yeah, I was gonna do some work. I've got a story for you." We just brought in a Jane Doe with no ID, no visible injuries on the body. What did she die of? We don't know yet. I'd love to have you on the case. I wish I could charge iPhones for you. Sealing on the anatomical theater. Miranda didn't allow outsiders. But Jacob was allowed. For one thing, she had a long and hopeless crush on Marlowe Sr. in the second place. She liked the boy's articles. They were truthful, based on facts without the slightest tendency toward jaundice. Jacob, of course, marveled at how one could maintain loyalty and feelings for his father for so many years. And it was also a mystery to him why the man had earned such loyalty and love. You couldn't find a woman like Holmes by daylight. Jacob cast an interested glance at her aged but well-groomed, not beautiful, a redhead with a scattering of freckles on her cheeks, short boyish haircut, a shrewd look in her blue eyes, thin as a birch, and most importantly strong, determined. In general, involuntarily, in addition to respect, there is sympathy. Miranda, did the body of the sheet return at this moment? Or have I forgotten everything in the world? Dark, smooth hair, eyebrows like seagulls in flight, beautiful lips, straight, precise nose, perfect, swarthy body. There was no doubt in his mind that he was looking at the woman in front of him. You're not well, Jacob. The pathologist got worried. Looking at the defeated guy, very much he could not hold back. Tears spurted from his eyes. Jacob stepped out into the dark corridor and leaned against the cold wall. Soon his father would be coming out. One must try to pull himself together and find out what had happened to his wife. He never filed for divorce. He kept hoping she'd come forward to tell him about their affair, or hide it, which was better. Jacob took the pictures of the car. He said goodbye to Miranda and went to the police station, hoping to... I'll tell you sometime. It's a long and murky story. They spent hours enlarging the pictures to get a better look, but they saw no signs of violence. That's what James said. We're not going to see anything on these pictures. She died accidentally. Assault or accidental. She didn't put up a fight. No scratches, no bruising on the body. Dress is intact. What happened to you? Girl? Expensive clothes, fancy manicure, well-groomed hair. What a grief for her loved ones. And she has no one but her husband. Jacob sighed. He's been looking for her for years. Found her. There. Who's the husband? Tell me, what's darker? Father, really. But why didn't you say anything? Yeah, our people were talking about this case, that he was wanted from prison. They found it when he was with her. I guess I wasn't in the suit. Yeah, that's right. You told me once that he got married. How am I gonna tell him now? I'm not gonna tell him anything. He's in poor health as it is. I thought he'd be strong and strong forever. Maybe he would have been if she hadn't disappeared. Did he give up after hearing that? Well, he still has to be officially notified. So there you go. And say, James, when he's home for 5 days, there's no ID on her. And we know the girl is Sarah Marlowe. Only then I didn't put my testimony into evidence. And there, while the investigation is going on, the father will be released. Okay, Jackson agreed. Have it your way. We need to know where she came into town from, where she was, why she came back, and why she died. Go ahead, get that information and bring it to me in a kiwi beak, and look for any witnesses who saw her alive. Jacob couldn't sleep at night. He remembered his and Clara's stormy past. He got out of bed, went to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of wine, then sat down to look at the pictures in his laptop, where he transferred them from his iPhone. Zoomed in on their makeup. The victim had a brightly colored evening outfit. Apparently was going somewhere new. Did she make it? We need to hit the restaurants. Hit an underground casino. No sign of a struggle anywhere. Blissful smile on his face. I don't think he's ever been high before. But who knows? She had a passionate, uncontrollable nature. He was awakened in the morning by a call from Miranda Holmes. Put me to sleep. I'm not bleeding, she blurted out angrily as the blood was turned off. Even if she'd woken up, there was no chance of survival. An egregious case in my experience. What do the police know about the girl? Nothing. And no leads. Oh, by the way, was she raped? No. I'm going out tonight to look for information. My guess is she spent the evening or night out in public somewhere. She's dressed festively. Yeah, according to her stomach contents, she had a big meal somewhere before she died. And she's got foreign blood on her shoe heels. I'm typing. Jacob had breakfast, jumped on a streetcar, and in half an hour was in the editorial office. Ask off the chief to intrigue with the prospect of sensational news. Jacob, you're getting into trouble again. You haven't had your snouts cleaned enough lately. Joe ranted. A burly bearded man with round glasses, smiling at the boy. You like stories, don't you? If it wasn't for Jackson's support and help, you'd be in the hospital with fractures. Joe back then was not an intellectually challenged gangster. And that exsanguinated girl. That's a crime unheard of around here. Out of the ordinary, so to speak. She didn't have her purse, though. Maybe it was theft. But then why kill so brutally? The killer wasn't interested in sex with the victim. It's going to take me a long time to get to the bottom of this and help the police. Please don't distract me with your phone calls. Pass my pile on to someone else, whatever it is. The material looks unusual. Most importantly, knowing the tenacity of Marlowe Jr. in response, got old and lost weight and called my son, but he wouldn't pick up. Good as usual. The spare key was on the shelf in the shed. John entered the house and made his way into the kitchen. There was a laptop computer on the table. There was a slit extending from it to the mains. Where did you go in such a hurry, son? He left the tech on. He sat down across from it and opened the lid, and the faucet glowed. Marlowe wrinkled his nose at the picture of the dead girl, wanted to slam the computer shut. Suddenly, his heart throbbed. He took a closer look at the picture and realized who was in front of him, and was literally dumbfounded. He wheezed and fell to the floor. John Marlowe woke up in his bedroom. Not usual were the aromas of clean linen and the freshness of roasted coffee beans. His son sat beside him. "How are you, Dad?" he asked thoughtfully, adjusting the blanket. "I'm all right. I've come down. Clara died." "Yeah, I found out by accident when Holmes called me over. Thought I'd see a stranger. And then this happened. She was murdered. Why? I wish I'd known. But Daddy's still here. You rest and recuperate. You shouldn't be worried." "Oh, son, I lived only in the hope that I would find her and see her." And now Jacob's heart ached with pity, looking at his grief-stricken father. How could I tell him everything? Now he would kill them with his own hands. Let this secret never be revealed. No, and I'll keep silent. What does it matter now? We'll find the father of the murderers, believe me. "All right, son, I'll live while I wait," the man said, falling asleep. Jacob went to shower without appetite, swallowed a sandwich, and froze at the kitchen table in one pose, all pondering the results of his investigation. The state of mind was devastated. The story was too personal. There were too many white spots in it. He used to be interested in racy crime stories. Now a young woman who loved him had been murdered. Grief shattered his father. The secrets of their relationship darkened his soul. Jacob perked up. "It is necessary to call the editorial office. Joe has news, but please allow me to rest today. I'm at my limit. Have you been traveling?" The guy sighed heavily, walked to his room, and collapsed on his bed. He didn't wake up until sunset. He dialed Jackson. He's been collecting information on Clark, too. A lot of it matched. Turns out, right after she broke up with Jacob, she went to the countryside. She had a fake passport and soaked in lies. Life was the governor's mistress for a long time. The retired general's kept woman met with high-ranking bureaucrats. Jacob had visited the places where the girl had lately lived, and he was lying when he told his father he would find the killers. He'd already found the culprit. Only a few days ago, he had been sitting in a railroad car, amazed at what he had learned. Having stayed in the small Volga town for a very short time, he discovered not only the motives of the crime committed, but also looked into the eyes of the person who hated him. It was a woman, Of course, for men were favored voluptuously. Perhaps some would like to put her in her place for her willfulness and rebelliousness, but to kill still at the train station. Jacob learned that she had traveled to Minsk on false documents. The investigation was helped by photos of the girl, which Jacob had kept from the time of their close acquaintance. Curly, lush, white blonde gladly told him that a local famous courtesan had bought a ticket from her. Only, she said, it was Lisa. Everyone here knew her. Cavaliers came to see the young woman from all over the region. As soon as an expensive foreign car drove off down the streets, everyone knew in which yard she'd stop. Lisa rented a comfortable private house in the town with a well-maintained yard and modern renovation. She never liked to do housework, so she had a housekeeper. Jacob found her on a neighboring street. Oh, right. I have her number on my cell phone. Without hesitation, Marlowe Jr. dialed it. Kelly picked up the phone and was immediately behind the hall. How long it's been since she's heard from him. I went to the sea. She praised herself. She's doing well on her own. Yes, alone. She didn't want to come with me. So you met in town recently? Yes, we met the night before I left. We went to a bar. We had a great time, like when we were young. She never stopped loving you. She kept asking me if I knew anything. I see. Well, I'll call you if you need anything. Okay, I'm on the phone. But let me ask you what you're calling for. And you're looking for a connection like old love never fades. You want to find her. No, I'll explain it all some other time. Later means never. Sad, sighed Kelly. I know you guys, and you're still living in the same place. Or did you move somewhere else? But none of the handsome like you did not ask to marry. I'm still with my parents. Shall we get together? I'll be back in 2 days. I'll think about it. I'll call you. Bye, Kelly. After this conversation, Jacob decided to have a conversation with Dean's parents. They were extremely surprised by his question about their daughter and her friendship with Clara, although they were happy to be contacted by the correspondent of the local newspaper. Jacob showed them his identification. They calmly told him that the daughter was now vacationing on the Black Sea coast, about the fact that they began to communicate with Slaga in kindergarten and then at school. Slaga, because the mother abandoned, ran away from her husband with another. He brought her daughter up to speed, and she finished school with his support and died. And then in school and after, girlfriends never parted. They were together all the time. It was only 5 years ago that their paths diverged a bit. Clara moved away, and Kelly saw her less often, and then stopped talking about her friend altogether. Kelly and Jacob thought they'd had a fight, something they hadn't shared. Jacob didn't tell them about Clark's death, just asked about mutual friends and took their contacts. It was so strange to dig into the past of a woman who had almost consumed him with her insane lust for passion. Turns out, she was also a head-turner in school and excelled in her studies. Hunting for the stronger sex Clara began in her walls. It was clear because the men who told about her immediately chewed face, eyes lit up and palms covered from the guys. It's been years, and she still excites them. Though how long has it been since I myself got rid of the vicious attraction? The more people Jacob interviewed, the more obvious it became that Clara and Kelly really were, as they say, inseparable. People were sure to characterize their friendship. It was a strange relationship, a classmate said. A full-figured red-headed girl strolling through the park with a stroller. Jacob was curious what she meant. Why did you have that opinion? But she's always been a favorite, a leader. And in junior high, she had girlfriends who obeyed her. And then Kelly outshone everyone else. She's always seemed like the difficult one. Quiet, but she'd get her way. So she sang along to Clara's line. And soon she became an indispensable friend. Like she fought off everyone. Dispelled all those who were with her. She didn't tolerate competition. She was arrogant and proud and with us. And everyone liked Slaga. She was outgoing and generous. We all thought that after school they'd split up because it was incomprehensible how such different girls could be friends for so many years. But Dean wouldn't let Clara out of her clutches. Do you think she wanted a lasting relationship with Clara? It's hard to know. She's a very shady lady. Jacob was the last one to interview Zhenka in Vasilkiv. According to the information he had gathered, he had previously been madly in love with Kelly. Jacob looked with interest at the man who was able to resist. They met near the city administration office. Jacob was approached by a short, stocky man. He shook his hand firmly. "Why do you ask about them?" Rick wondered, talking about how he perceived the girls' friendship in his school days. He scratched the back of his head as he saw them together in Minsk. Self-waste not shutting up. They didn't even notice me, even though I was passing close by. I thought about it, but wow, I haven't had feelings for Kelly for a long time. I've forgiven her. It's all in the past for me. And they still have a strong friendship. Forgiven for what? Jacob's on the rebound. So she wouldn't let Kelly go out with me. So she lied to me. Told her we slept together, and I told her I loved her. When in fact, we didn't. Tell me, Rick, why didn't it happen? Because Clara is very beautiful. Men were crazy about her. She's just not my type. I don't like a predator, smiled the young man. I see. But thank you for the information and assessment of those long ago events. So, can you tell me what happened? Someone killed Clark. By the looks of it, one of our own. That's terrible. Of course, Rick's got his hands full. She was a bitch, but she didn't deserve to die. Yeah, hardly anyone would kill her for manipulating other people's feelings. You'd have to really hate her. I haven't come across one yet, Jacob reasoned. But it's a good thing I didn't kill her myself. He thought. Yeah, she seemed to have more sympathy in class than Kelly. They disliked her, forgave her a lot, but only because she was a favorite of Clark's. She even complained to me once that she was fed up with the role and wanted to step out of her friend's shadow. But then we had a conflict, and I do not know about the further development of events. Jacob was suddenly disturbed by this information. Kelly had not given him the impression of a loyal friend before, despite the fact that he had seen her several times. Intuition told the guy that behind the innocent appearance of the girl hides not noble motives. He decided for himself that he would meet her at the station and digest her. Jacob personally called her back and played the interested in a date bow. To his surprise, Dean came completely enthralled. I blatantly started toward him. Where are we going to go with you afterward? Will you rent a hotel? More like Kova girl on the phone. Do not chase horses. We need everything in order. First, I'll feed you at the restaurant. Then I'll take you to bed. What do you say? Agreed. Jacob shared his plan with them alive. They met in the evening in the city park. Let me back you up, James suggested. If she's the killer, nothing can stop her. Make sure she doesn't feed you to us. Criminals rarely change their MO. A girl might realize you suspect her, and Kelly's openness to intimacy could be a trap. I'll get a room near you. I'll introduce my operatives to you. James, it's unnecessary that I can't handle the girl. Trust me, Jacob. In the criminal underworld, a lot of people put on the guise of decency and appear weak. In reality, they're usually unscrupulous and ruthless. Well, agreed with Comrade Marlowe Jr. Having agreed, the guys left Jacob to the hotel and the police to the police station. He still had to study a lot of information on the case to formalize it properly. A day later, Jackson revealed to Jacob the new facts that his colleagues had dug up at Dean's place of residence. Jacob had no sooner finished his morning coffee in the hotel restaurant than the name James popped up on his iPhone. Jacob, I was right. These are the circumstances. Anyway, at the hospital where our suspect works, 6 young women OD'd in a month on her shift. Blamed it on them. Like they weren't following doctor's orders. The victims were being treated for hypertension. Where'd they get it? Oh, in this day and age, diseases are getting younger. Her friend altogether. Kelly and Jacob thought they'd had a fight, something they hadn't shared. Jacob didn't tell them about Clark's death, just asked about mutual friends and took their, "What's your diet?" Yeah, and stress isn't exactly a rash. The pace of life. So why would she take their lives? What's her motive? I don't know that yet. And that evening, Jacob's phone was ringing off the hook. They were Kelly's attacks. Jacob, I want to go straight to my room. Will you get out of the way, get dressed up, or should I go to yours? Mine. He pretended to give up. The train arrived on schedule. Kelly jumped out of it happy and cheerful. She gave Marlo a big hug and handed him her bag. Oh, it was so hot in the car, Dean shared. All night long my eyes stayed shut. She looked adoringly at the guy, flapping her long eyelashes. It seemed before him a naive and pure girl. Her gentle gaze, pure blonde hair, clear, blue eyes, open smile, confused Jacob. What kind of conniving killer is she? Cunning in her own mind. Maybe, but she's not smart. She goes wherever she wants, like a chicken. He put his arm around the girl's fragile shoulders. Now you're sleeping all chilly in the room. There Kelly took a shower, changed her clothes, tidied up, and only then went down to the restaurant with Jacob. James was nearby. After receiving a text message from Marlo Jr., he broke into the room. There was a gym bag on the floor. Things were scattered on the bed. His keen eyes stopped on a very expensive purse. What was on the nightstand? It was impossible to buy one on a nurse's salary. James carefully opened it and examined the contents. He found a vial of Jacob coffee. Well, of course, although it doesn't mean anything yet. Meanwhile, Jacob was looking intently at his companion. Yes, Clara, she was certainly far away. But she was not unattractive. Short in stature, blonde, and pretty. He cast a glance at her slender calves and saw in the ankle area behind the living. But apparently a recent scar. It was still pink, healed a few days ago. Noticing his gaze, Kelly tucked her legs under the table. Why are you hiding your pretty legs from me? If you're going to give yourself away, Jacob is going to give himself to me. Oh, that's me. I had a friend who was too pretty, and everyone paid attention to her exclusively. That's why I still have a complex. Jacob flashed in my head. Though I learned to love myself, the girl continued. Didn't Clara call you while you were at sea? No, but she's probably in her little town there. Did it ever occur to you to ask how your friend was doing? Oh, come on, Jacob. Like you don't know how stiff she is. She only communicates when she wants to. I'm used to it, and I don't take any unnecessary steps in that direction. Well, I knew you weren't interested in me, but in your ex-girlfriend. The girl was starting to get angry. Jacob filled his glass with champagne and interestedly looked at Kelly, jealous. You're wrong. It's been over with her for a long time. You can't live a human life with someone like her. You become a slave. How sad is your voice and your look now, Dean stated. You loved her after all. I was sick of her, answered the boy. That's more accurate. It's not love, it's an addiction. Let's get on with the summer and the food. He nodded at the waiter who brought the hot food. You'll still need your strength at night. He winked at the girl. After dinner, the couple returned to the room. Jacob skillfully portrayed passion, fiercely possessed Kelly. After the intimacy, the girl completely melted. She did not live in his arms and smiled blissfully. I've never had such a thing. You are an exceptional lover, quietly whispered she. I can be. Jacob grinned to himself. But that's one of those things. You can't praise yourself, no one will. But Kelly could use a lesson from her friend. How to get men. Totally mediocre. And where were you at 2030 when she was killed? Whose purse did you have? Jacob joined the interrogation. Can you tell me how you got the wound on your foot? Did you unhook your shoe? Guys, I don't understand what's going on. Kelly, on what grounds are you asking me? I was with my friend at a restaurant. So what? Were you the last person to see her alive? And then she died. Jackson wouldn't stop. Oh, but I didn't even know that. Kelly theatrically flailed her arms. I saw her alive, healthy. Jacob walked over to the table and took his purse from it. He went to the bank, risking being made a fool of. Clara came to see me this afternoon with that purse. and it belongs to her. After saying that, Kelly expelled and started throwing her things and anything else she could get her hands on at the guys. But James and Jacob quickly coped with unmasked John Jackson, properly charged her with murder, told her to change her clothes, take with her the necessities of life, and took her out in handcuffs to the street. There she got into a police car and immediately tried them on. She did not scream anymore, only looked angrily at everyone around her. Further interrogations of the girl showed that the friendship was trouble for her. Kelly had always been possessed by an all-consuming envy and jealousy, so her friend had accepted death from this feeling. Dean's confession was frightful. Jackson allowed a friend to be present, and he heard the whole story in its entirety. As soon as I saw Clara in our class, I immediately hated her. She didn't have to do anything to get attention. She was the center of attention. The guys and male teachers loved her, and the girls loved her. She was always generous and easy to talk to. Yes, she was an idol. Everyone admired her, imitated her manner of speaking, dressing, moving. Only no one succeeded. Only she had naturally inimitable animal magnetism, as simply attracted to her, and that was the only thing that pissed me off too. I resisted as much as I could. I wanted to be better than her and more interesting to others. Only time showed that she was the one who had all the sympathy, the fancy clothes, the endless male attention. She'd give me something from her closet. I took it. How did it piss me off? Taking her socks, settling for the men she dumped. Was that fair? And in high school, she had a fight with me and Jenka, the only guy who chose me over her, but she didn't want him. He wasn't her kind of guy, and he wasn't interested in her, so she still couldn't let me be happy for a while. I am Clara. She turned to Jacob the devil. It was important to her to possess everyone around her, and the only way to stop it was to wipe her off the face of the earth. All I did was wait for the moment of vengeance, and it came. I persuaded her to go to the seaside together, but before we went to a restaurant. She had a nice hotel in town. I was in a humble motel. And then it was just a matter of technique. I spiked her coffee, man. And as we were walking back through the wasteland, she felt sick, realizing she didn't have long to live. I revealed to her the true reasons for her behavior somehow weakened, and she managed to stab me in the leg with her heel. But then, as she passed out, I pulled the plastic system from my bag and pumped it out of her body. The blood quickly covered her with cardboard boxes, took my purse and went traveling. I deserved it. There was plenty of money in Marienka's purse, enough for me and for clothes, and for a delicious meal, and for rented accommodation at sea. Tell me, my dear, why did you kill so many women in the hospital? James asked. I heard them talking about how happy and well off their lives were. Anything yet? Meanwhile, Jacob was looking intently at his companion. Yes, Clara, she was certainly far away. But she was not unattractive. I was jealous. I was also conducting an experiment. What dose to give in Marienka? Nobody suspected me there at all. Kelly Dean was smiling in court. It's not that much. 15 years for sweet revenge for a hated friend. Jacob wrote an interesting article and got a commendation from the editor-in-chief. He detailed the whole story to his father, clarifying his and Clara's past. Gradually, Marlowe Sr. began to recover, and Miranda Holmes visited him. Life fell into its own rut, and the Marlowe story was gradually forgotten. Calmness and dimensionality seemed to have entered their lives. But this was a deceptive impression. One day, Jacob had to go on a business trip, and his bus was involved in an accident. He woke up to the touch of hot hands stroking his face. He opened his eyes, but there was no way to see the man's face. Instead, there was a thick haze and a worried female voice. It obviously belonged to a young nurse. Thank God. You're finally awake. That's good. Now maybe you'll tell me your name. At least I'm questioning you. I'm gonna go get the doctor. Jacob tried to comprehend what was happening. The doctors came to my senses. I'm in a hospital. Why is there no picture of my last memory? My eyes hurt. I can't see anything. Where am I? Look, Jack, our John Doe is finally awake. Well, that's good to know. Driving all the way out here with no ID must have been in a hurry. He's a fighter, so he'll live on. Am I right? Sick, can you hear me? What's your name? Jacob took a deep breath, and his chest was crushed by pain. Tried to open his eyes, which were dark, so he whispered. Weakened his voice. Jacob, I'm Marlowe. Jacob, you mean? And where you live, do you remember? The boy strained his memory, but he couldn't remember anything about himself. A blank slate. Feels like he just started living today and mumbled. I don't know. I feel pain. Can't see out of my eyes. In such a helpless position, Jacob stayed in the hospital for more than 3 weeks. In contrast to his memory, his eyesight began to gradually recover as his physical well-being improved and his body regained its strength. Despite the fact that the doctors quickly found out who he was and where he came from, he himself could not recover the former pictures of his life. James and his father came to visit him and talked about what he had been like as a young boy. But Jacob only shrugged his shoulders. His mind was empty. The doctor's explanation was that after the accident he had retrogrades, amnesia, and the condition. Oblivion could last a long time. Jacob had problems not only with his vision, but also with his musculoskeletal system. Multiple fractures meant he could only walk with a cane. His father took him home, and there Jacob was mortally bored with what to do. With his mind, he would do everything, but his body was limited in movement. His own existence seemed meaningless to him. He looked at old photographs, listened to the stories of his father and friends, but the memory was like a thick fog. Some vague images and outlines disturbed him at night, but there was no clarity in them. Day and night he began to read everything that came under his hand: magazines, newspapers, books, tried to find something familiar in the professions, literature and art, but no signs of identification with anything I could not identify with. And suddenly I began to write stories, essays. Words literally poured out of his soul. Thus were born his novels in the genre of fiction. True, only his father and his girlfriend Miranda read them. On one such evening, Jacob met one on the street. He was older. He'd been living without a past for 5 years. Never remembered himself before the trauma. Talked to him. His wise musings on life were close to the guy. He even experienced a faint hope that the images of his former life would return likeness again. Pleasant communication brought the men closer together. And during the next meeting they told each other about themselves. Some raiders in broad daylight beat a new acquaintance. If he wants to live, of course. That's how he ended up in Minsk. As long as he had money, he lived in hotels and ate in canteens. When the money ran out, he found a modest place to live and got a job as a janitor in the same neighborhood. Fate ordered so that both became lonely, unnecessary to society. Reading and a common view of many things asked him. One early morning, Jacob came out to him in the yard. A friend waved to him. He was deftly handling the Christmas tree. It was already warm, for it was a hot summer. Marlowe sat down on a bench, waiting for his friend to come to him. Suddenly, he heard a sound like a cat flickering or a baby crying. Thought he heard it. Turned around behind him near the trash can. Saw the baby carelessly tangled in Baykov's blanket. He quickly jumped up, picked up the blanket from the ground, and holding it to himself, ran to the hospital. It was difficult to breathe and walk. Injuries were still making themselves felt, but he went forward fiercely. After all, it is necessary to have time to save the baby's life. Was the mother's heart indifferent at the moment when she abandoned her child? Even animals do not do that to their offspring. Ran to the nearest department, took the baby immediately to the children's hospital. They were surprised that the lame Jacob so quickly overcame more than 2 kilometers. Returning home, the boy told his father and his buddy about the unexpected find. Marlowe Sr., at the request of his son, found out where the baby had been sent. It turned out that he saved the girl. She was treated at the Central Hospital. Jacob was very worried about her health, and with the help of James Jackson, who issued him a certificate of freelance police officer, was able to freely visit the rescued child. The head of the ward favored their meetings. When she learned that he was the one who had picked up the girl, she asked him, "What would you like to call her in life?" Sort of like godfather to her, "Now you come for Jenna." The name was pleasant to his realization. "It's a good name," the woman agreed. "That's how we'll do it." The foundling case went straight to Jackson's desk. He searched for the girl's mother, found her in the hospital. The story she told him was egregious, but her deed was not justified either morally or legally. At the hospital, James immediately sought out the doctor who had treated the young woman. "Well, my dove," my doctor looked at Jack with tired but kind eyes. "I can tell you it's almost a miracle, the beating, multiple concussions, but there's no irreparable consequence. The girl is strong and on the mend. Well, she didn't get hit in the stomach, so she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She was moved to a comfortable one-bedroom today. You're free to question her." "Thank you, doctor." "Thank James. What's the room number?" 33. The doctor answered. "Thank you too." He squinted a little. "Maybe you can get along with her. She says she can't remember anything. But as a doctor, I can see there's nothing wrong with her memory. There are other motives for this silence. We should punish such a thing and not let it go unpunished." Before entering the girl's room, James staggered a little to the door. He didn't even want to talk to her, but he knocked. He heard a slightly hoarse knock in response. "Come in." The young woman looked bad in the light of day, but he could tell that she was pleasant-looking. Despite the large bruises on her face, Jack realized that in good health she was quite good-looking. Her appearance could not be called standard. She possessed a natural soft beauty. On the graceful face of the girl, as two stars shone, large cornflower-colored eyes framed by thick eyelashes on her cheeks' dimples, and thick blonde hair slightly waved. "Hello, I'm an investigator. I'll be handling your case. Tell me how you were." In fact, she only wanted to forget forever her entire personal history that had led to such a violent denouement. Starting from the moment she had first seen Stephen, her future husband. Their acquaintance had been very pleasant at first. He wooed beautifully, was caringly polite and responsive to any request of the girl. Camille grew up in a boarding school and did not remember her parents at all. And that's why she went to work right after graduation. She and Stephen worked in the same chain store and constantly communicated as colleagues. Camille was a novice specialist, and he on his own initiative immediately took patronage over her, helping her with advice and guidance. They became close on one of the corporate holidays, when they escaped together from a long but boring banquet. That same night, Stephen kissed her while walking her home. He courted like a real gentleman, was very bland and witty, gave small but nice gifts and flowers without occasion. Before Camille had time to remember, she found herself with him in the registry office, and as soon as she became his wife, their relationship ended. First of all, her husband forbade her to work. Then he audited her closet, threw out some of it. In the trash went short skirts and blouses with frank cleavage, fishnet lingerie, jewelry, and even cosmetics. Then Stephen began to disappear nights and waste money in the casino. His wife he did not allow to go to the nearest store, kept locked up, locked the apartment on the key, going to work or to a nightclub. He made scandals if she painted her lips without his permission, tore her underwear, and threw things off the balcony. Unfounded, accusing the spouse of lewd behavior. The man constantly humiliated his wife, tried to hurt with a word, reproached with a piece of bread. At the moment, when under the violent and mentally outbursts of his wife, Camille decided to leave her husband, she realized with horror that she was pregnant by him. The day she told her husband this, he beat her for the first time, deciding that the child was not his. Then the beatings became regular and more prolonged. Saving her unborn child, the young woman managed to escape through the back door of the women's clinic during a routine appointment to which Stephen accompanied her. She had her papers and some personal savings. A few days later, her husband found her at a close friend's apartment on the internet, beat her severely, forced her into a car, and drove her into the woods. At first, he probably wanted to burn her, as he doused her with gasoline, but then he just hit her over the head with a weighty board and threw her. There she heard her husband cursing her and wishing her death. Gathering her last strength, she took several days to get out of the forest slum. How had she managed it? She did not know. Ragged, hungry, beaten, and yet she didn't file a complaint against her husband. After the hospital, they wandered among acquaintances. Her husband wasn't looking for her anymore. He thought she died in the woods. Camille realized that if he found out that she was alive, sooner or later he would track her down and beat her to death. She was afraid for both herself and the child, so she decided to keep it a secret until she gave birth. Afterward, she dropped the baby off where Jacob found it. Jackson silently recorded her statement. "Don't you want your daughter back?" he asked. "No," the woman cried. She refused to give her up on the grounds that her husband would kill the baby girl with her. James instituted criminal proceedings against both of them. They were convicted and sent to a penal colony. Both spouses died there under unclear circumstances. The girl was left an orphan while her parents were still alive. Only Jacob could not leave an infirm child. He was attached to the girl with all his soul and knew a lot about her himself. How much she eats, how she sleeps, when she cries. When the baby got stronger, she was transferred to the baby house. He got a job there as a watchman, but he got the job done in a matter of months. He rebuilt his reputation as a top journalist. Life had given Jacob a gift. Though he had lost his memory, he was now a father. He was given a little girl to raise. He became her legal guardian. A daughter became an important goal. The father helped raise her, and he was thrilled with his granddaughter. He found faith in himself too. He settled down. Raising a baby girl, two men, was not easy, but they put in it all the love and tenderness on which only were capable. Grew up with her from diapers to school. They truly loved Jenna with that unconditional incommensurability and love that elevates a person above the ordinary. Their hearts were filled with unselfishness and pure thoughts. The little girl was able to give them true happiness, except that there was no mistress in the Marlowe house, and when it seemed hope was completely gone, fate gave Jacob another chance for personal prosperity. Beautiful, statuesque, accurately honest red-haired girl sat in the carriage of a fast train and leisurely drank hot sweet tea to the rhythmic clatter of the wheels. In Jenna's memory flashed pictures of the recent past. The bustling capital city, its noisy highways and bright night lights were left behind. Her soul was longing for the long-awaited meeting with her native land, cozy home, and caring mother. She lay down. Drama quickly piled up and enveloped the girl's consciousness, and she instantly fell into a deep sleep. She awoke to the unceremonious shouting of the conductor. "Citizens, passengers, wake up. The train is arriving at Minsk Station. Standing time is 3 minutes." Jenna, fearing the unpleasant stupor caused by sleep, and quickly packed her things in a sports bag. Outside the window flashed cityscapes, and the train was beginning to break. Jenna stepped out of the carriage in the late afternoon, although it was still daylight. The station was empty. Only someone's face flashed in the window of the station and immediately disappeared. The girl took offense and sighed. How long had it been since she had been in Minsk? Moved on the way home. She went back to the past, to her childhood and youth. She remembered how she jumped on the sleepers and got a reprimand from her mother for such behavior. But this did not stop the girl and ride on the platform together with her friend Jenna Drusels and played classics. True, the station duty officer dispersed them, explaining that it was dangerous. But the bench with a comfortable backrest is special, wonderful, memorable. How many girls whose secrets she knows? Jenna took a seat. Her hand gently stroked the roughness of time, the planks. Here was the inscription preserved. Jenna plus Jacob. James had done it. He was in love with her, and she sympathized with Lek too. Now James was not the last person in Minsk. She read Jacob's article about his investigation of a terrible crime in the city, and it was committed by a girl out for revenge. What kind of terrible, soul-crushing feelings are there? Jen has been friends with Jacob since she was 5. Ran into their house, and the boy's father was serving another sentence. Jenna still doesn't remember him now. She saw him a couple times when he came home from prison. But then all Jacob's friends were asked to go home, and Grandma Valia cried, wiping her face with her apron and kissing her son on the top of his head. Then all together again. Laser Paraski and the apple trees in their orchard. They played both hide and seek and catch up. Often James would join them. He was a terrible thug and a brawler when he was a kid. We used to go to school together over a small climb. It wasn't scary. After school, we'd walk on the playground, throwing their briefcases in a pile. Her father would take them for a motorcycle ride on a summer evening, if the mood struck him. Jenna thought that even now she felt the track and pressed James against it with every fiber of her soul and cell of her body, as she had once done in the cradle of that motorcycle. She liked to learn the physiology and anatomy of the human body, so she wanted to become a doctor at the age of 10. And in her youth, after reading Mikhail Bulgakov's novel Notes of a Young Doctor, the girl was finally confirmed in her desire. Despite the fact that Jenna had few illnesses and practically did not encounter doctors. As a child, the atmosphere described in the books was internally close to her. Already as a girl, she was ready for responsibility for someone else's life and health, treated all abandoned cats and dogs. She was interested in learning all the subtleties of this craft. And one more incident from her own life pushed her to choose her future profession. One day, she cut herself and a pustule appeared on her leg. Her mother took her to consult a surgeon. He, of course, prescribed treatment and dressings, and the girl often had to visit the children's polyclinic. She liked everything: their cleanliness, medicinal odor, white coats, and friendly nurses. After already in high school, the same surgeon came to their classes and told about his profession. After his speech, the desire to give themselves to this craft only strengthened. Perhaps it was the finger of fate, because even now she did not regret the decision that she chose the path of a doctor, but she really wanted to devote herself to children. Therefore, after the 3rd course, she went into pediatrics, and when practice began on duty in the hospital, the girl realized that she had chosen a profession to her liking. She had very good supervisors who discerned in her the future luminaries of pediatrics. This, of course, was presented by them as irony. But Jenna had indeed fallen into the hands of a unique specialist. Her mentor was a thoughtful doctor, teaching her to reason, analyze disease symptomatology, and think clinically, to see nuances in practice that textbooks didn't talk about. That's why Jenna Smith was drawn to this hospital. She was trusted there. It was as if she had already established herself as a boarding doctor. Already after she received her medical degree, the girl worked in the profile. Especially, she liked those days when the venerable doctors went on vacation and duty became independent. Then immediately felt the increased responsibility. After all, under all the documents was not the name of the mentor, but her own. In general, she had no regrets about her choice. Professionally, she was growing, gaining experience, and was satisfied with everything. But her personal life did not work out. No, there were plenty of suitors, but only her heart was long occupied. Jenna's memories were interrupted. Her mom ran towards her across the tracks, worried and aged. "Jenna, what are you doing? I'm meeting you on the platform and you're not here." "Don't worry, I raided the memorials. You said you couldn't make it." The girl rushed to hug her. "Yes, my employee didn't show up. No way we're gonna do this. A hole in the fence to close." Vasilchikov, taking her mother under her arm, Jenna smiled broadly. "Even though she's changed, she still smells just as delicious. Herbs and milk. Mum's house is quiet all around, not that in a frenzied, ignoring Shield's priceless joys of life. Everyone's flying somewhere, all dazed. Their faces are stamped with universal importance, and in their eyes indifference to their neighbors. What can you do? The rhythm of the capital. At home, everything was as before. The same curtains, perfect cleanliness, the smell of freshly cooked fresh soup. Everything was the same. And what could change? As if hearing her daughter's thoughts, Cindy answers, "There's only no man in the house. It's hard to manage alone. But I don't need anyone after your father. You'll get some rest and we'll go and see him off. I've tidied up the grave. Mom and Aunt Rick Jackson. They live on Zareknaya Street. Where will they go? Everything suits them. The capital doesn't beckon with its lights. We pensioners have our own life. Gardens, orchards, and in the center there are houses like Marlowe's. Here they are with excitement," asked Jenna. "Yes," the woman sighed. "He works as a caretaker at the orphanage. That's where James worked, while the girl he rescued was being cared for." "What girl?" "Oh, Jenna. Everyone here knows the story. I didn't tell you. You were so fond of him when you were young. And when he got a stepmother in the house, he forgot all about you. Somehow I got out of it. I knew then that we were no match for them. I guess she forbade him to be around you." "Really?" Jenna was surprised. "Not married," Cindy hastened to add. "After the accident, he lost his memory. He doesn't remember anything." Tears came to Jenna's eyes. How could it be? Why would a guy do such a thing? After such a message, the girl barely touched her mother's literate things, ate hastily and without appetite. She wanted to be alone. It was too sad news she had learned. Jenna got up from the table. "Thank you, Mom. Don't look for it. It's a culinary masterpiece. That you barely moved to this masterpiece." The girl's mother sighed. "I've been so excited about so many things. I'm going to walk to our school." Go, Jenna. Maybe your heart will calm down at home." As soon as the door shut behind her daughter, Cindy sank tiredly into a chair. Would Jenna have left here if it hadn't been for her unhappy love? Jacob had been the only one she had breathed since she was a child, and everything was going so well for them. And then, like a whisper, he just walked by like a stranger. And he had his eye on Jenna. I saw it. I'm a good judge of these things. It was like the Snow Queen in a book, like a guy's heart for a lollipop from a piece of ice. And Jenna walked along the forest clearing, breathing in the fresh air. Grasshoppers rolled merrily in different voices. Birds sang. The wind swayed the majestic crown of trees. Hearing the cuckoo, she stopped, decided to try the game, as in childhood. If it's even, then the wish will come true. And now I'm wondering if I'll meet the person I'm thinking about. I looked around. There was no one there. The old game didn't work. She was sadly reminded of the old days. She didn't realize that the object of her thoughts was now moving toward her. 5 minutes later, they bumped into each other on the forest path. He gazed intently at the young woman, and suddenly, like a flash, like an epiphany, all those stories of his life that James's father had told him about came alive, sparkled with warmth and vividness, and he realized why he had given his daughter that name. Because the relationship with Jenna was the purest page of his destiny. It was possible to remember them countless times they warmed and pleased, begged. Memory relegated him to the days of Marlowe and Smith's happy youth. I tell you again, if you don't stop making noise immediately, I will have you thrown out of class. I urge you to concentrate. Final exams are coming up. Jana Vladimirovna, the physics teacher, corrected her glasses with Poland on the tip of her nose and continued explaining a new topic. The door was ajar to the classroom. Slowly surfaced breasts, and then dimensional bodies. Kathy, the headmaster. Excuse us a moment. Adriana. She walked to the back of the room. There in the courtyard of Jackson High School you were catching. She turned to the students and pointed to James, who had entered with her. Please love and pity him. Starting today, I'm taking him under my control. If you skip class, you'll have to deal with me. Jackson said hello, scrutinized his classmates, and made his way to a vacant back desk. But you're a fruit. Jacob winked at his friend. He shrugged indifferently and nodded to the girl. A couple of days later, as a May thunderstorm rumbled outside the window, The Jackson family was preparing for their son's 21st birthday. A statuesque black-haired woman was closing in on the kitchen table. A handsome man with a somewhat sly expression watched the game cooking in the oven. He carefully opened the cupboard door, once again filled his glass with Wermich, and sat down at the kitchen table, happily holding out the amber drink. James stepped out of. How fast has time flown by? He was a baby, and now he was a grown-up boy. She slowly sat down on the stool. Tears came to the woman's eyes. James, have you grown up? Graduated from high school and into the army. Quietly, she mumbled and sobbed. Mom, stop getting wet. He hugged her and gently wiped her wet cheek. The Nancy doorbell rang. Immediately fussed at the table, the shining face of Jacob appeared in the doorway. He came in and looked at his friend appraisingly. You've made your point. He commented on Jackson's strict new suit. Quietly, James put his index finger to his lips. Now the parents will be gone. Change. A present, right? He explained. I don't want to offend. Jacob nodded understandingly. How's the chicken? Nancy shouted toward the kitchen. When Rick heard his wife's voice, he rummaged around the kitchen with a glass in his hand. Finally, he set it down behind a flower pot on the windowsill and walked into the hall. His wife looked up at him. Yes, a cooked game, she said. Rick stepped in and shivered, allowing his wife into the kitchen. She opened the oven, pulled out a baking tray. The crust was covered with a pink-brown crust. The sweet smell of meat and seasonings filled the room. It was done. She turned off the stove, then took a ravioli and a bottle of Wermich from the cupboard and silently handed it to her husband. But all the guys turned, she turned to Jacob and James. Make your own mashed potatoes. You'll be splitting up. Knock on the wrong door. She opened the door and walked out of the house. Nancy was called out by her husband. Why did you turn around? She forgot to take off her apron. Nancy laughed, took off her apron and threw it over her head. Her spouse sidestepped the grinning boys. Jacob deftly caught it on the fly. Soon the cake arrived with the delivery. Accepting it, James bowed theatrically. Thank you heartily for such an appetizing birthday present for my best friend. May it be yours. The bakery clerk was startled and hurried to close the front door. James went back to the apartment, went into the hall, and put the cake on the coffee table by the window. Then drained the water off the potatoes. I'll have the potatoes, he called Marlowe over. And I'll go and change my clothes. On the whistle and under the nose rhythmically melody. Jacob smoothly opened the refrigerator, took out milk butter, and plunged into the process of cooking mashed potatoes. When the dish was done, he tangled the pot tightly in a terry towel, grinned contentedly, and headed over to his friend's house. James had already changed into a dark blue Empire, tight blue jeans, and was triumphantly retrieving 2-liter bottles of vodka from under the couch. Jacob whistled happily. And I thought I'd have to settle for a crown. How did you manage? Did your father show solidarity? James handed the bottles to Jacob. He's a world-class entertainer. Jacob winked at his friend, went into the hall, and put the bottles on the table. Insistently assertive, the bell rang. James headed for the front door and opened it from the threshold. The guests gave a friendly shout of happy birthday. Happy birthday. Thank you. James bowed playfully, rolling the whole thing up. The noisy crowd barely fit in the narrow hallway. James immediately rushed over to the tall, slender brunette, Sveta Maxikova. He helped her take off her windbreaker, placed it on a hanger, and sat down carefully, removing her shoes from her flawless feet. The classmate tipped her head slightly. Sveta laughed contentedly. James stood up. She wrapped her arms around his waist and lightly touched her lips to his cheek. The young man. Then, closing her arms, confidently took him under her arm, and they walked to the table. And Jacob accepted the clothes from his companion's John. And looking at the filled hanger, he walked to the bedroom, folded the jackets on the sofa, and returned to the guests. They were rattling their plates in friendship, pouring themselves cold appetizers. James patted him on the shoulder. I'll get it. Marlowe waved his head negatively and headed for the front door himself. It really was Jenna. "Happy birthday, James," she greeted Jackson. "You don't mind my company?" "No," he smiled. "Come on in. You can undress in my room." He nodded guiltily toward the coat rack and strode toward the bedroom. "Jacob will show you out." The girl nodded and followed Marlowe. The room was in semi-darkness. Jacob held out his hands to help the girl take off her cloak. With a familiar motion, she threw it off and put it on the back of the couch. "Let's go to everyone." Yes. 12 pairs of eyes. Hand in hand, they appeared in the doorway for a moment. There was silence in the room. James flew over to Jenna and pulled her to the table, taking a seat next to him. Jacob sat down next to Sveta across from them. So Jackson rose from his seat. "Finally, everyone is gathered. So let's have a toast to my coming of age. And wish me a happy birthday. Happy birthday." The guests cheered in the midst of the fun of the light. Dancing with James from behind his shoulder, watched Jenna. Something about her was beginning to annoy her a lot. Imperfect, sure. But there's something about her, she pondered. The boys are bursting at her. Soon, they'll break their eyes. Beautiful, thick, golden-colored hair, slightly oval, not falling below her shoulders. She's not badly built, but she's clumsy. I'm much more graceful. The dress is not bad. Straight, one thin khaki color. It's a good eye color. The chest and the cleavage is nice. What can I say? She has taste. Her legs are slender, but mine are longer and much prettier. Her eyes are either gray or gray-green almonds. You can see the shape. That's where she gets her rest. Mine are just huge lakes. Can you drown? Yes, but what's that look in her eyes? The caressing, thrilling look of sensuality. Skin as pale as milk. Lips very beautiful, medium-sized, straight nose. Sharp chin, self-taught. Still, she is very attractive. Svetlana pressed her lips together resentfully. "Something, my queen," frowned. James kissed her ear and whispered, "You are the most beautiful. She's a long way from you." He nodded toward Jenna. Maxikova shuddered. She ran her slender fingers through James's thick hair, looked into his mesmerizing black eyes. "And you know all this about me." And she wrapped her arms around his neck and gratefully penetrated his lips. He responded to the girl, but he himself furtively still admired Jenna. What a thing Zemora was, and how had she blossomed. A sweet, luscious, young girl, but too right. What to do with her? Jacob couldn't help but admire the girl from childhood together. It wasn't until recently that he realized who she had become to him by her eyes. An open smile, an infectious laugh. Literally, everything about her seemed warm and familiar to him. He stood up and asked Smith to dance, but the tune suddenly ended. James quickly jumped to the music center, set a new track, and the music spilled into the room. That clever rascal, drowning out the human voices. Jacob put his arms around Jenna. Her closeness made him feel infinitely happy. She tossed mismatched hair over her face. Jacob said slightly audibly, "Your hair smells of the summer variety." "Really?" She looked embarrassed. "You don't like it?" "No." He gently touched her lush curls with his hand. "Do you like it?" "Very much." The girl laughed softly, and Jacob felt that she relaxed in his arms. The girl, swaying to the beat of the music, rolled in the palm of her hand a delicious pink apple. She looked at Jacob with Jenna and smiled contentedly. The feeling that had erupted between them pleased her. Sure, a smile plays across his face. He gets up from the table, walks over, touches my neck, gently runs his fingers through my hair. There is no peace next to James. Girls are crazy about him, and so am I. I'm in love with his searing black eyes and hair the color of a crow's wing. His humor, his plasticity. I'd tear anyone apart if she wants to take him away from me. Jenna. All right. That's it. I mean, you gotta admit it to yourself. Good girl. The girl, in an impulse, hugged James, pressed tightly against him. A small shiver shook her body. Abruptly, She took a big bite of apple. Droplets of juice appeared on her lips. Sveta looked at James, and in her blue eyes danced the fires of fierce, all-consuming passion. The music ended. Jacob and Jenna stood in the middle of the room, unable to look away from each other. Then they sat down at the table, and without paying attention to others, enjoyed each other's company for the rest of the evening. By midnight, the guests began to leave. James, who had been drinking a lot, came up to Katya and took her hand. "I've decided to see you off after all, baby." He staggered a little. The girl gently withdrew his hand and waved her head negatively. "No, I'm with Jacob. Let's go retired." Sveta chuckled, holding out his jacket to him. James slung it over his shoulder swaggeringly, clapped his friend below his back, and followed the others outside. Jacob helped Jenna put on her coat, and they went downstairs. The street smelled of rain and spring freshness. The girl took Marlo under her arm. "And if we get that prologue back," she extended her arm, "we'll be at my house in 10 minutes. I know a longer way." Jacob winked at the girl. "Normal heroes always take a detour," she laughed. All the way they chatted, and Jacob caught himself thinking that he was easy with this girl, carefree, simple, and heartfelt. And so the newfound happiness did not last long, for then Clara burst into his life, wrapped up in his vicious passion. She stole his father and his only love from him. Jenna, of course, hurriedly left the city, went to Moscow. There she entered the medical school. In general, he lost her. Along with happy memories, Jacob was covered with a dark past. That he spent with Clara about it, he now could not think without disgust. Away. He didn't want to drown in it again. He was admiring. Jenna hadn't changed at all. Even better now. He stepped closer. Her hair smelled the same. Her eyes looking at him with the same love. "No, it can't be. Am I dreaming? I just came for 3 days. I haven't been away for almost 4 years. My mom was scolding me. How are you doing?" Jenna pretended not to know about Jacob's problems. He acted like he didn't have a blackout. "It's okay. Let's go for a walk. I live with my dad. And I have a daughter, and he has a granddaughter who's heard about this story." "What a horror." "Well done. You did the honorable thing. I guess we're responsible for those we tame." "What's her name, Jenna?" "Oh, great. So we're namesakes." "Yeah," Jacob smiled. "You'll get to know her. Anyway." They walked hand in hand for a long time, like they used to. They reminisced a lot about childhood and youth, laughed a lot, especially long laughs about how he would walk her home, choosing the long way around to be near her longer. Jenna noticed that Jacob was limping, but still did not ask anything. He opened up on his own. He told how he had miraculously survived the accident, how he had been treated in the hospital for a long time, and then spent a year recovering. With pain in his voice, he told about how he had found the girl. And then suddenly he asked, "Are you married?" "No," laughed Jenna. "I have not met someone like you," and blushed. Jacob pretended not to notice the embarrassment of the girl and hiding, seized by his excitement, said goodbye at her house. "But it's okay for now. I'll see you around." Her eyes are either gray or gray-green almonds. "I see your mom. She's watching out the window like she did when she was young. You're coming to meet your namesake." "Of course I will." "Yeah, my mom's a Sherlock Holmes in a skirt." While Jacob, despite being tired from the road and excited to meet her, Jenna stayed up all night. Thoughts swirled endlessly in her head. How come their paths had diverged back in high school? Why had he become indifferent? It was obvious even now that he needed her. She felt that Jacob truly loved her. How today his eyes shone with happiness. You can't hide that. Yes, he did. He'd gotten his memory back in one fell swoop. As soon as he saw her, that means something. And she, oh, how she wanted a confession. But it didn't happen. Something unknown to her had happened in the past, and today he was silent. For the next 2 days, the old friends were inseparable. Little Jenna joined their company. They took many walks in the forest belt, picked strawberries together, counted cuckoos and shrieks together, and laughed. They were good together, as they had been long ago in their school days. Daughter Jacob in such an atmosphere felt at ease, as if in the company of peers. But it was. Jacob and Jenna immersed themselves in their happy childhood. Jenna's mother, when her daughter ran home for a snack, she just shook her head. And when she was about to walk her to the night train and heard that Jacob was going to do it, she took a little offense, but only a little, because she understood. They stood on the platform, hushed, watching the approaching train. Jenna's heart plummeted somewhere downward. She grabbed Jacob by the neck. "I've always loved you alone." Jacob kissed her back long and tenderly. "I know, kitten. I just realized everything too. Only now it's probably too late." Jenna didn't answer him. She got into the carriage all the way back to the capital. Only nothing went well for her there. And in a month she was rushing to Minsk again. When the train approached the station of her childhood, she saw a young man sitting on the very bench boldly labeled Jenna. Plus Jacob took a closer look, and Jacob jumped off the foot of the carriage, rushed to meet him. And he was already limping a little too, and rushed toward her. "Did you not leave here for a month?" The girl whispered in his ear. "Yes, I waited." He laughed and hugged Jenna tightly. "I felt today that you will come back, and I will not let you go anywhere now." Jacob hugged the girl even tighter. "Let's go, my love." Tears of joy spurted from Jenna's eyes. They flowed down her cheeks, and Jacob tried to stop them with his kisses, saying, "Come on, Jenna, we're together now. It's okay." And taking hands as in the good old days, and immediately went to his house, dazed with happiness. We didn't talk the whole way. And what to say when everything is clear? It was very good for the two of them. Passion. The music ended. Jacob and Jenna stood in the middle of the room, unable to look away from each other. Then they sat down at the table, and without paying attention to others, enjoyed each other's company for the rest of the evening. By midnight, the guests began to leave. James, who had been drinking a lot, came up to Katya and took her hand. "I've decided to see you off after all, baby." He staggered a little. The girl gently withdrew his hand and waved her head negatively. "No, I'm with Jacob. Let's go retired." Sveta chuckled, holding out his jacket to him. James slung it over his shoulder swaggeringly, clapped his friend below his back, and followed the others outside. Jacob helped Jenna put on her coat, and they went downstairs. The street smelled of rain and spring freshness. The girl took Marlo under her arm. "And if we get that prologue back," she extended her arm, "we'll be at my house in 10 minutes. I know a longer way." Jacob winked at the girl. "Normal heroes always take a detour," she laughed. All the way they chatted, and Jacob caught himself thinking that he was easy with this girl, carefree, simple, and heartfelt. And so the newfound happiness did not last long, for then Clara burst into his life, wrapped up in his vicious passion. She stole his father and his only love.
To be honest, Elizabeth was in for a pleasant shock. She liked Leo. She just couldn't get over Helen yet. Charles and Emily didn't bother her too much. Another protest would calm down, meet a cute girl, and she wouldn't remember who Emily was. Molly and Emily were standing on the balcony. "Molly, why haven't I heard anything about Leo? Come on, girl, tell me where you got it. Why is Elizabeth reacting so strangely to him? He's a decent young man. Doesn't she like him again?" "Oh, I've done so many things." And Molly told the whole story. "Damn, that's a shame, Helen. I didn't see it." "Emily, what's your 46? Oh, come on. I don't have anything with your brother. I don't mess with kids. It's just a show for Grandma. You're setting a bad example for your brother. I'm the pilot today. Remember that fortune teller I told you about? It's weird, but it's coming true more and more. She said they're trying to control me, but they don't know what I want. That's right up my grandmother's alley. She genuinely wants me to be happy, so she tries to keep me out of trouble. She chooses where I go to school, where I work. Not because she wants to control everything and dictate who should live how. She's trying to keep me from making mistakes. But who and when has someone else's experience ever taught anything? The only thing that can teach you anything is the bumps you've made yourself. Yeah, Emily, you're already the jumping expert. Tell me about it. My friend's got a lot of stuff to put away. What else? The fortune teller said it hasn't come true yet. Well, there must be some secret to know, like you don't know the most important thing about yourself. How can you not know something about yourself? Of course, I'm not a perfect girl, with surprises grandmother did not earn, but what grew, that grew. I've been living with myself all my life. What I may not know about love the fortune teller didn't tell Emily. It's been so many years. I don't remember. It was like something you don't see right away or you don't see right away. What love? I was 10 years old. Here, so much for love. You didn't see Leo right away. Well, tell me if you like it. I do. I do. But that doesn't mean anything. I don't know who else you haven't seen. Leo's not talking. Would you at least say something? What did you say? I don't know. Elizabeth saw the guests off, smiled, and said kind words. It's good that gathered all the secrets became less, and then live each their own life, and do not tell her. Even if she can't influence anything, at least she'll know about it. She's gotten old. It's time to pass on the power. Let someone to look after the young ones who jump out of themselves just to prove their independence. Kevin held on to it. We need to have a little talk. Molly came out with Leo and Emily. Charles jumped out next. I'll walk Emily out. Chuck, baby, go to Grandma. You asked me to help. I did. That's all we agreed on. You walk me home now, and then I'll have to walk you home. Molly intervened. Emily, my brother, a serious, smart man. Remember, he saved you and me. Why do you think he's a boy? He's younger than you, but he's perfectly capable of walking you home. Don't get all bitchy about your wife. You're not. Chuck, walk the girl home. She's got a history of getting into trouble. So friends, nobody's going anywhere, Leo. Here's the car. I already called the driver. He's gonna take us home now. Charles, you home and back. That's Molly's way. I'd ask you out for a ride with us, but I don't think you'd say yes. Can I ask you out on a date? Tomorrow, maybe? I don't think Grandma would mind. I'll call you. I thought I'd send carrier pigeons. The apartment was dark and quiet. Molly went out onto the balcony. Through the open window in the kitchen, the voices of Grandma and Uncle Kevin could be heard. Molly didn't want to eavesdrop. It just happened to be that way. They were talking loudly. They were both on edge. Molly was surprised. She'd never heard Uncle Kev raise his voice before, especially not at Mom. I shouldn't have listened to you. I should have told you a long time ago. Sooner or later, you have to pay for everything you've done in life. I've already got so many debts I won't be able to pay for the rest of my life. How long can you keep quiet? You'll be silent for the rest of your life. You chose this fate for her. Don't ruin the girl's life. She's already lost her father. Now she'll lose her mother in the fall. What will happen? Have you thought about it? No. Kevin, you don't dare make everyone miserable, knowing you're having a hard time, but you've lived with it for years. Keep living with it. It's not just your secret. So you don't think Molly has a right to know the truth. You're always deciding everything for everyone. Now you've decided it's best for her. How do you know what's best? Molly listened and she got scared. What's the secret? What doesn't she know? The fortune teller is right again. You don't know the most important thing about yourself, and neither does the queen who keeps that secret. Grandma, what do we do now? Go right now and demand to be told, or pretend she hasn't heard. If they've been silent for so many years, it must be something very important. Or maybe it's scary. Maybe it was better not to know anything. Molly stood and listened, but realized that she couldn't go on living if she didn't find out what was being kept from her. It's her life, even if it's the most unpleasant and scary ones, but she has to know. Molly snapped out of her seat and ran into the kitchen. I don't know what the secret is. Elizabeth and Kevin stared at her in amazement and remained silent. Grandma pulled herself together and tried to keep the conversation quiet in a way that always worked. Molly, what does that mean? Were you eavesdropping? Grandma's not in the mood for decorum right now. Tell me. There was confusion and pain in Kevin's eyes. He wanted this so badly. So many times he had imagined telling Molly the truth, and now he didn't know how to do it. Poor girl, why should she have to answer for the sins of her parents? It's a terrible shock to find out you've been deceived all your life, even in good faith, but deceived. How do I explain it to her in a way she'll understand? She might not forgive them, hate them. Now Kevin thought Mom was right. I shouldn't have brought it all up. He berated himself. The girl had lived happily ever after. You never know what's going to happen next. There's no turning back. We have to talk. Hope that Molly is a smart girl, will understand and forgive. Elizabeth also realized that the conversation could not be avoided. God, this is so hard. But is Kevin happy? It's what you wanted. Like I told you not to dredge up the past. Who's better off now? Come on, son, spill it. It's time to pay the bills. What are you guys doing here? Kitchen? Charles came in. Well, that's good. Let him hear it too. It's his business too. Kevin talked about his first wife, Molly's mother, how he loved her and how her family didn't accept her. Talked about what he'd been through since her death. Tried to explain why he gave up his daughter. Told about the terrible longing that made him travel all over the world, just to forget, not to remember. But the longing never went away. After Eugene died, it got worse. He saw Molly grieving and could not tell her that he was the father. A little girl couldn't bear the shock. So he chickened out and kept silent all his life. Molly listened and didn't understand how it could be. The closest people cared about her all her life, and it turns out they lied all the time. Chuck watched amazed eyes. It is necessary in their official noble family, where it is a mortal sin to say indecent words. You can't lie to your grandchildren about such secrets. And what do they do themselves? Grandma, of course, is a tough cookie. Uncle Kev gave his word, but Mom hasn't been hanging around for so many years. Molly stood up and walked silently out of the kitchen. Charles jumped up and ran after her. Her face was very strange. Kevin and Elizabeth looked at her confused and prayed that nothing bad would happen. Molly locked herself in her room. Charles knocked softly, put his ear to it, listened, silence, opened the door. Molly, may I? Molly sat in the dark. Couldn't see. Is she crying? Charles came over, sat next to her, put his arm around her shoulders. It turns out that you are not my own sister, but my cousin Wonders. Molly, cousin. You know, if it turned out that you were a foundling at all, you're still the closest to me. Molly, well, do not worry, of course. Ancestors upset, but basically you have nothing in life will not change. You know, I feel sorry for Uncle Kostya. He got his grandmother with her games in the nobility and spoiled his life. If she'd accepted an unsuitable daughter-in-law into the family, maybe the tragedy wouldn't have happened. And after her death, you could have just taken her into your family. And you'd live your life knowing who your father was. Chuck, Molly exclaimed. They've been lying to me my whole life. Turns out I had a living father living next door to me. I feel like I haven't lived my life. They decide everything for me. They know best what I need. They didn't see fit to tell me who my parents were. Chuck, honey, I don't know how I'm supposed to live my life. Molly. Charles saw his sister getting hysterical. Somehow we have to make it stop. Look on the bright side. Your father's alive. That's a blessing. It's a shame you found out too late. But it's better late. I'm not going to have that. So stop crying. It's not like you're grieving. You should be happy. Why don't you lie down now and think about how you and Uncle Kostya will build a relationship now? Well, there's a father. Molly lay down, but she couldn't sleep, of course, and didn't want to. She wanted to think before going to sleep, which is especially easy to do. Molly liked to save the day's problems for later. I'll go to bed. Then I'll think. It was nice to lie in a warm bed and think. The problems didn't seem so important anymore. Thoughts were racing. Molly caught herself thinking about nothing, not the things that seemed important. And now she could not concentrate and decide how to behave with her grandmother, and most importantly, with her newfound father. Then remembered the trip to the sea with Mom and Dad, then suddenly out of the blue, the nightmare of Emily's experience at the dacha. Suddenly, I remembered funny little Chuck. How did he try to walk? A big black cat knocking him down. Then I saw my institute friend's Uncle Kev, who came from an expedition with long hair and a beard. Grandma scolded, but Molly liked him handsome and masculine. Then the pictures began to change like a kaleidoscope. Molly realized she was falling asleep. I wish I had thought of it. There was no strength to resist. In the morning, she felt better. Maybe Chuck was right. There's no grief. Yeah, they lied to her, but they didn't mean any harm. They thought it was for her own good. And having a father like Uncle Kev, not bad at all. Molly realized she wasn't the only one who was freaking out. She had only been through the night with the news, and she was already freaking out. Uncle Kev lived with this secret for 20 years. It's scary to imagine. Another problem is, what do we call him now? Not Uncle and not Daddy. There was a knock on the door. Chuck came in. How'd they send me to get you for breakfast? They're afraid of what they've done. Now they don't know how to look you in the eye. Look, you can get yourself something for this too. What do you want? They'll do anything right now. Charles laughed his ass off. From a new laptop to permission to go out till midnight. Chuck, what are you talking about? How am I supposed to communicate with Uncle Bones now? I can't call him Dad. Oh, Molly, don't sweat it. Just act normal. You don't think he was hoping, do you? He's gonna tell you, honey, I'm your daddy. And you're gonna scream, Daddy, my darling. You're gonna throw it around his neck. I like it so much. Our noble family is such a soap opera. You have to admit, it's cooler than a soap opera. The Queen Mother is a disobedient son. And orphans. Brilliant. Chuck, you're an idiot. There's a little bit. It's just that no one at home can see it. She's got a good brother, though. Supporting, comforting, even, as it turns out, saving her from death. Molly came over and gave Charles a big hug. My favorite boy, what would I do without you? You don't have to wipe snot from me. Let's go to breakfast. No one talked about what had happened. They kept quiet. We understood. It's gonna be a while. Everyone has to get used to the new reality. Everyone felt guilty. Even Molly. What was her fault, though? Just one. Chuck was having fun. But he tried to keep his head down. He knew he could get his ass kicked. Everybody's too nervous. Didn't look at Molly so miserable with poisoned eyes that her heart stopped. Molly thought she had it the worst. She couldn't decide how to deal with her new father. Nellie's not the one losing her daughter. She'd always been a real mother to Molly. Molly couldn't realize that wasn't true. She walked over to Nanelle, hugged her, and whispered, Mommy, help me, it's not so hard. You know how much I loved Daddy. I still miss Nanelle Hale, and tears came. Elizabeth left the table. I don't want the children and grandchildren to see her crying. Somehow things gradually settled down. Everyone calmed down. Life went on as usual, with its troubles and joys. Only Kevin looked at Molly with a question and hope. But she didn't know what to say to him yet. Molly was dating Leo, and we were having fun together. A romance seemed to be brewing. There was no talk of feelings yet, but there were definitely feelings. Anyway, Molly was thinking about Leo all the time, missing him. It was impossible to keep it all inside. I had to have someone to say, yes, you're not wrong. He's the real prince, trustworthy and loyal. And Emily, as luck would have it, was going somewhere over the precipice. Probably another heavenly love. I wouldn't want to get in trouble again. Charles was assigned to play the role of vestmate. He listened to the revelations without complaint. His sister's lover was supportive. He didn't play hard to get. He liked Leo. He's a cool dude. Molly wouldn't let go. He's the real deal. All that grandma's advice wasn't even close. Leo invited Molly to his dad's birthday party. Time to meet the parents. Leo, I'm afraid I met your grandmother. It's an ordeal. My parents are dandelions compared to her. I'll tell you all about my family so you won't be surprised. I already did. We, as in the fairy tale, was a father of 3 sons. The eldest, of course, the smartest. Andrewsha, we have a serious investigator. I wonder how he managed to get married. From him, girls ran away in half an hour, could not withstand his boredom correct and boring junior in the story of the fool. And we just have informals. Dan's a party musician. Hell knows who else. He looks the part with headphones when he's dancing. You recognize him. I drew him when I was doing Helen. But I'm average, you know, not so good. Who's Daddy? My dad is a brutal man, a former car racer, now a solid businessman. And my mom is a goddess that a cool car racer worships all his life. Happy they're one love for life. That's what I want. Maybe you shouldn't bring me to your birthday party. Let's do it some other time. No, that's the day. My wife's always bringing her girlfriends. My mom's been nagging me about meeting someone. She's always trying to get me married. If I don't come alone, they'll be happy to have me. Molly was stunned. Excitement made her stutter for some reason. When we got to the house, I couldn't get out of the car. My legs wouldn't move. Leo's mom opened the door. Molly was breathless. How beautiful. As it turned out, her mom was just as worried as Molly. The eldest is married. The youngest is still to be decided. Leo had never brought a girl to the house. I was curious to see who he finally chose. On the other hand, if she didn't like it, what could she do? She wouldn't discourage her son. It would take him another 100 years to choose. But it would be hard to see him make a mistake. Molly hasn't said a word yet, but Mom's heart is relieved. Well done, son. You didn't choose for nothing. Leo's dad came out into the hallway. Oh my God, this is not a family. This is the cover picture. Tall, statuesque, with clear, practiced eyes. Come in, my dear young lady. I'm so glad Leo finally thought to bring you. He's old and smart, but not too bright. When Molly entered the room, she could tell who was who. Leo described the clamps very accurately. The excitement evaporated without a trace. It was easy and fun. This was impossible in their family. Grandmother would not have allowed to behave so directly. But here they didn't act like nobles. They were having a good time. Helen, help me. Mom beckoned Leo and went into the kitchen. Mom, are you going to interrogate me? I'm going to die of curiosity. Where'd you get Molly like that? She studies, works at our publishing house. Beautiful, smart, of noble blood. What kind? But her grandmother made up her own story. She's been tormenting her family with her fantasies all her life. You should see their house. It's like a nobleman's nest, and Molly has somehow managed to stay normal. They're a very nice family. Grandma plays queen. They don't bother her. A good girl doesn't miss out. She's clean, bright. You won't meet another one like her. Mom, why did you praise her so much? It's the first time you've seen her. First of all, I see what's good. Secondly, if you don't get married now, you're going to be a pain in the ass for me and Daddy. I want to put you in good hands. Oh, I see. You're annoying. Well, there's a little bit. Mom hugged Leo. I want you to be happy. I don't pester the wind in his head. You should get married. Invite Molly over more often. And don't take offense. I'll always be on her side from now on. You know, female solidarity? Thank you, Mom. Leo and I left my parents' house. We didn't want to part, so they went for a walk at night. Walking, silent. Silence together. Sometimes it's more bonding than talking. Molly felt a strange warmth in her soul. Maybe that's what love is. But Leo didn't say anything about love. She couldn't confess it herself. The next day, Emily came running. Thank God, she showed up. As expected, she fell in love again. And again for life. A student from Krasnoyarsk transferred to the institute. A tall, healthy Siberian. He has an old grandmother here. So he moved. Emily saw him and disappeared. Emily, you're going in headfirst again. But to think, to see. Molly, when I see men like that, I can't think. You're the one who's looking and thinking. But for me, you know, my head immediately goes blank. He's so cool, so serious, so thorough. Then think about it. Maybe he's a healthy young man who's got a lot of time on his hands. He could drop everything and come and take care of his old grandmother. He's not real. Without any pitfalls, he can't cheat. Sometimes I think he's a little too honest and straightforward. I'm lucky he noticed me. I'd be hard up for a guy like that, but I wouldn't let him get away. What about Chuck? Molly started the poem. The boy fell in love. The key word being boy. Molly, think about it. I'm where I am and Chuck's where I am. He wants a clean, good girl, and I'll take care of it myself. I can only imagine what would happen to Grandma if I started dating Chuck. I'm crazy, but I'm not that crazy. Somehow you'll explain to him gently that I'm not the one to fantasize about. And how you can be so careful. We're not gonna survive another Nick. Ugh. Not to mention the night before. Only Peter showed up with a huge bouquet, excited and solemn. Not like he's proposing. That's all I needed. I guessed it. Right from the doorstep, he held out the ring and talked about love. Molly tried to say something, but Peter was unstoppable. I had to listen to the end. The door opened and Kevin walked in. From the threshold, assessed the situation, saw a confused Molly. A young man. Well, we're on the threshold. Come into the room. Molly took a breath. Some respite. Peter walked solemnly into the room. Grandma had already come out, and a minute later he pulled up brightly. I wonder if they sensed or overheard. What about parenting? Okay, we'll figure it out later. Peter continued his speech. Elizabeth watched with interest. And Kevin, seeing how nervous Molly was, decided to intervene. Peter, I don't think my daughter is ready to answer you. Peter averted his eyes. What daughter? The doorbell rang again. Jesus, what are we so crowded today? Chuck went to open it, shouted from the hallway. Molly, we're really looking for you today. There's another groom here. You should at least schedule them to come into the room. Leo came in with a bouquet, checked out the mise-en-scene. The family's all here. Some pretzel with a ring in his hand. Chuck trying his best not to get infected. Yeah, I'm almost late. Molly, what's going on? Didn't you tell me we already applied? Charles couldn't take it anymore. Through the laughter, he said, Yes, we did. You already applied once. Why didn't you get married last time? Grandma didn't approve, did she? Yeah, Elizabeth. Elizabeth was looking at them. Oh my God. What kind of childish behavior is this? Whether to yell, whether to disperse, or to laugh. She had long ago realized that Leo was the groom. Peter doesn't stand a chance. But Molly wouldn't talk. Molly didn't understand. Is this a continuation of the game? What kind of statement? Last time they lied to piss off Grandma. Now why does she love Leo? He's playing again. Peter was more honest. He came and proposed. Leo realized what was going on with Molly. She can't hide her feelings. Her face was bewildered and disappointed. He went to Kevin. Kevin Marksman, I'm a little confused. I didn't expect to see a young man with a ring. I actually came to see you. I wanted to ask you for your daughter's hand in marriage. I thought I should ask you first. I'm very fond of Molly, and I want her to be my wife. But before I proposed to her, I wanted you and you, Elizabeth, to agree. Molly loves you very much and will not go against your will. Yes, I don't mind. Just what Molly says. It's up to her. Molly, will you marry me? I love you very much. I've met Elizabeth, and they don't ask me, but I don't mind either. My beloved grandmother, father, and little brother. I think I'm getting married.
Subscribe and click the bell.
I was already walking down Nevsky Lane, turning toward the road. A thin layer of snow streaked the sidewalk. Couples were walking past, warmly intertwined hands warmly warming each other. Grown men were hurrying home from work to their beloved wives and children. I was walking alone in the distance. Through a light haze of fog, I could see a trolleybus pulling away, grasping the bag on my shoulder, so as not to lose it in the movement. I quickened my step. The doors were already closing, but one of the passengers asked the driver to wait. Entering the trolleybus, I shook my head from the flakes of snow and, thanking people for waiting, sat down on a vacant seat. Passing by a bridal salon, I smiled involuntarily. Recent memories of Charles came to mind. Soon I would marry the man half the town was in love with, whose face and name graced billboards and the most popular magazines. To the man who chose me over the 1,000 models surrounding him. Charles Vance is one of the richest men in our city, a businessman and sponsor of many orphanages, a man with a capital letter. We met 10 years ago, when I was still working as a teacher in an orphanage. He came there with his colleagues to present the orphans with numerous gifts. At first, he didn't even notice me, but I liked him almost immediately. A stately, tall, decent, handsome man, helping those in need. And if it hadn't been for his kind heart, perhaps we would never have met. I was jolted out of my thoughts by a sudden jolt. The trolleybus slowed, and several passengers moved forward. The bags of the woman sitting in front of me rolled toward the beginning of the transportation, knocking the unfamiliar man to the ground. Holding had not been taught. "Mother, do you want me to smash my head in here?" Grow pants from the wet snow that flew in. The exasperated man turned to the old woman. The same ran her eyes, but answered nothing. Standing up from her seat, the woman slipped, whether she was dragging 10 bags, and then could not hold on. On the face of the stranger appeared obvious dissatisfaction. He angrily kicked the lying bag, from which it tore, and the contents fell out directly onto the dirty floor. Seeing the confused woman, I jumped up sharply from my seat and approached the perpetrators of the noise. Respect for elders, you know what it is. My voice sounded confident, reflexive. I covered the old woman with my body. "Speak as you should." The surprised woman, whose gray strands peeked out from under a dark kerchief, threw down her eyebrows and looked out from behind me. The man was taken aback, but he was still aggressive. "Why are you meddling in other people's conversations?" His hard gaze went straight to my eyes, but I didn't back down. "I'm talking as I see fit. Let him watch his rags. I wish your children would talk to you the same way." I shouted, picking up the belongings of the poor woman who was the target of this ill-mannered tramp. The stranger shouted and headed for the exit. The other passengers watched the scene intently, not even trying to get into the fray. "Are you all right?" I gently stroked the woman's back and put her bags on the empty seat next to her. The old woman, as if still reeling from the situation, slowly sat down and looked at me with grateful eyes. "I'm fine, daughter. Thank you so much. You didn't have to fight with that fool for me." She motherly took my hand in her rusty but soft palms and smiled. "What's your name?" "I'm Kathy." I smiled back at the stranger and sat down across from her. "Is someone going to meet you?" "No, I'm fine." In truth, she nodded politely in acknowledgement of my worries. "My name is Camille. Let me write you the address. Come and have tea with me." "I'd be glad to, Camille." The old woman's eyes sparkled, as if one of her wishes had come true. That's when I turned to the window and saw the familiar houses. "Excuse me, this is my stop." I handed the crumpled woman a sheet of paper and a pen from my bag, so she could write her address for the next appointment. The woman happily wrote the street and house on the mirror in her jagged, barely legible handwriting, and gave me a glance. Stepping out of the trolleybus, I breathed in the fresh, frosty air, freeing myself from thoughts of that unpleasant insolence. Suddenly, there was an insistent sound. I reached deep into my bag, searching for the source of the ringing. Pulling out my phone, Charles popped up on the screen. Smiling happily, I picked it up. "Good evening." It was on the other end. "Hi," I answered, continuing toward the house. It had stopped snowing. The wind had died down, but the squeak from under my shoes gave away that I was outside. "You're still not home." Charles's voice became sharply agitated. "I would have picked you up from work if I'd known you'd be home so late. Don't worry about it. There was a lot to do today. I got off a little late, but I'm almost home now." As I stumbled, I cried out sharply, afraid I would fall. "Kathy, are you okay?" Charles on the other end of the phone was almost shouting, probably scared for me. "Charles, I'm not a child. I just tripped. I'm fine," I assured the man in a calm, slightly cheerful voice. "Let's meet tomorrow at lunch." My lover tiredly exhaled directly into the tube and spoke "Scare me well." "I'll pick you up at 1 o'clock. I'll be waiting for the meeting. Kisses to you too." I smiled, dropping the call even though I knew my man couldn't see me. He always told me about my beautiful smile, and when I see him or hear his voice, I'm immediately thrown into color. Even though he's busy, working and famous, Charles tries to give me all his free time. Of course, except for time with his family. He is the only child of his parents, who are already quite grown up, and often spends evenings with them. My lover has long offered to visit his family together, but I am still afraid that I did not like my future mother-in-law. I didn't consider myself a confident or well-mannered, or worse, some arrogant lady. But the fear of my future husband's mother still did not leave me. As it is customary since ancient times in most Russian families, mothers-in-law have a peculiar attitude to the wives of their sons, especially if they are the only heirs. Twirling the ring on the ring finger of my right hand, I took a nervous breath. Panic was building along with the feeling of familiarity approaching. After tidying up before bed, I lay down on the freshly made bed and pulled out my laptop. My thoughts were filled with nothing but Charles. I thought about how much I missed him, how much he missed me, how soon we could live together, how I would cook him dinner, how I would meet him after work, how he would hold me gently in his sleep and whisper about how much he was in love with me. Thinking back to how skeptical my family and friends had been about my relationship with one of the richest men in our city, I chuckled. They hadn't believed from the beginning that such a powerful, handsome, self-sufficient, and confident man could pay attention to someone like me. And what was my older sister's surprise, who had spent her whole life talking about how I wasn't good enough for the perfect husband. When she met Charles and me at a familiar restaurant in our neighborhood, Lisa had married when she was barely 20. She considered it a major accomplishment in her life and bragged about it left and right, saying things like, "I'll never achieve that." My mother and father were always supportive of the eldest daughter, continuing to trample on my own dignity, humiliating me with words, actions, and attitude. But I loved them despite their behavior towards me, respected them, helped them, and never turned my back on my family no matter what. The ringing of the phone made me get out of bed and clear my thoughts of the echoes of the past. "It's ringing," I answered quietly. The rustling in the receiver alerted me. "Yes, I can come to you." A woman's barely audible and voice echoed on the other line. I nervously recognized the familiar voice. It was Lisa. "Lisa, are you okay? Why are you calling so late?" I asked worriedly. "Can I come over?" My sister asked again, trying to suppress the hoarseness in her voice. Probably out of tears, I only said yes and waited impatiently for Lisa to arrive so I could finally find out what had caused such a late call and visit. Putting on my house robe, I went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and sat waiting for my big sister to arrive. I would never leave her or my parents in a time of need, no matter what our relationship was. Lisa hadn't called me in over a year, citing business, family, raising a son, and generally I'm the youngest and should call on my own. But now, at 12 o'clock in the morning, her voice spoke of something else. It begged for help, even though it didn't say so directly. Insistent. And I was already at the front door, taking the iron door away. And looking at my sister with a frightened look, I gasped, "What's wrong with you?" Before me, I saw not that cheerful, smiling and cheerful blonde girl I remembered, but depressed and clearly not caused. All frightened girl who covered her bare shoulders with only pain in such a bitter cold. "Kathy, I'm sorry. I have nowhere else to go." Her sister's voice was shaking herself. She was shivering, shifting from foot to foot. Lowering my eyes down, I noticed that Lisa was standing barefoot. I silently hugged my sister, and she nestled against my chest with desperation, encompassing me with her cold, skinny arms. Without a word, I led Lisa into the kitchen, sitting her down at the table. I went to get my things, choosing the most appropriate clothes. There were 1,000 thoughts brewing in my head, but one of them was the one that most resembled the truth. Her husband, a cruel tyrant, had kicked her out of the house without even a chance to dress. And I was seething with anger that some jerk could treat my sister like that, even though they have a child together. "And I'll pour you some hot tea." I handed my sister warm socks and a cozy sweater, and I headed for the supervisor's office. My hands were shaking, whether from worry for a loved one or for injustice to my sister. Lisa tapped her nails nervously on the table, looking away from me and toward the door. "Drink." I handed my sister a mug of hot chamomile tea, hoping it would calm her down a little. I tried to catch her gaze, but it was in vain. She was looking anywhere but into my eyes. "Explain to me what happened." "I apologize to you, Kathy." Lisa sobbed and then broke into sobs, occasionally gasping from her own hysterics, and put my arm around her shoulders, gently stroking her back. Words wouldn't have helped here, so I tried to soothe my sister only with actions. After a while, we moved into the room. Lisa was curled up on the bed, staring at the door without taking her eyes off it. "Can you tell me?" "I won't tell my parents anything, Lisa." My voice was quiet, but my sister heard me. "He kicked me out. He cheated on me and kicked me out." My eyes were still fixed on one point. Only my voice sounded hoarse and detached. "John said he was going to take my son away from me." My eyes widened, and I was visibly nervous. Even though I rarely saw my nephew, I loved him, and I wasn't ready for him to be in the hands of this fool in love, even if his parents moved away. He needs to stay with his mother. Even though Lisa was not a very good friend and older sister, she treated motherhood with awe and love. And Liam loved his mom too much. When Lisa married, John seemed to everyone to be a fairly adequate, fun, and loving man. But his behavior at that moment kept me on my toes. I tried to warn my sister, but my word against my dad and mom and my sister's crush meant absolutely nothing. Perhaps situations like this had happened before, but I was not privy to them, just like my parents, because the Smith family was always set as an example to me that one should be just like Lisa, find a man like John, and live happily ever after in the communal living quarters of her husband's late mother. Now that Lisa is completely devastated and exhausted, bereft of the will to live, lying in my home not knowing what to do with her tyrant husband, my fears from 10 years ago have been confirmed. He is not worthy to be my sister's husband. And despite the fact that Liam loves his father, he is not worthy to be the one. I can talk to a lawyer I know. Will you be divorced? Will Liam stay with you? I whispered, hoping to rouse my sister. She only looked up at me, waving her head in denial. I love him. We just need to make up, Lisa whispered, covering herself with a blanket. Stunned, I jumped out of bed and spread my arms. You're crazy, Lisa. That man has no respect for you. If he cheats, he doesn't love you. He's blackmailing you with his son. You have the right to go outside in 30-degree cold, without shoes or clothes. And you're still talking about love. My eyes blurred and my thoughts were filled with hatred for my son-in-law. I wanted to protect my sister and do everything I could so that this rude man would no longer be able to hurt the one I loved. Lisa didn't say anything, only occasional sobs, sluggishly hiding her face under the bed. Liam at her parents asked me rudely. Receiving a nod in response, I exhaled quietly, knowing that my nephew was okay, one of the main tasks at the moment. After waiting for my sister to fall asleep, I headed to the kitchen, made myself a strong tea, and sat down with myself. What to do? What to do? Should I tell the family? Should I call the lawyer in secret from my sister? Or maybe have a conversation with John so that he realizes his mistake? My thoughts were jumbled with questions in them, and after sitting at my desk for over an hour, I didn't notice how I fell into a dream right behind him. I woke up to my neck stiff and my arms aching from resting against the hard surface of the dining table all night. Sighing heavily, I got situated and headed to the bathroom to shower and wash off the remnants of last night's horrible night of biting myself into terry towels. I quietly entered the room and stared in amazement at the removed bed, which no longer had my sister on it. Only a torn sheet from my work notebook caught my eye. Thank you for taking me in at this hour and at such a difficult time. I'll take care of my problems. Don't worry yourself. With gratitude, Lisa. As in childhood unbearable, I muttered to myself under my breath as soon as I read the note. I didn't expect anything more from my sister, knowing the dislike she had for me. I smiled warmly as I ran my fingers over the uneven letters on the sheet. She'd left me notes like that when I was a teenager. Usually she asked me to cover for her in front of her parents while she ran off to discos and boyfriends. And at the end, there was always a threat to make sure I didn't screw her over in front of her father and mother. Lisa didn't know how to thank for help, no matter what it was. She might have wanted to, but she couldn't because of her pride, her temper. She didn't like to show weakness, I missed my family, but I wasn't sure if they did. That's why I visited Mom and Dad so rarely, and my sister even less often. Glancing at my watch, I out realizing that I was already late for work. In a hurry, I grabbed my bag and keys from the nightstand and left the apartment, leaving my gloomy thoughts behind. After greeting my colleagues, I went to my office to do the paperwork for the children whose parents would soon be coming to pick them up. For a year, I have been the head of the orphanage, where I started working as a teacher. When I opened the first file, I laughed. It was said that Vaughn would never be taken too naughty, and now I found a mother for Zurianov. Having attached the photo to the sheet, I continued my work. There was a knock at the office, and he came in. John. I was surprised to see my son-in-law on the doorstep. Where's Sliska? He didn't even deign to say hello. Dark-haired man began to ask questions to me. Why do I know whose wife is mine? Deciding not to specify where exactly his wife spent that night, I answered with a question I know that she called you at night. John stepped up to my desk and fixed his angry gaze directly on me. The door behind him swung open, and Charles walked in. The situation had reached a fever pitch, and it was urgent to save the day. But how? I had no idea. Charles, it's okay. I gave the man I loved a calm look so he wouldn't worry about me. Where's Lisa? John asked again, already pounding his fist on the keyboard on the table. She flew off to the side, taking the pile of papers with her. I squirmed, afraid of getting caught in the hot hand of my angry son-in-law, but I pulled myself together and answered firmly. I do not know where your wife. Look elsewhere. Charles quietly approached John from behind, put his heavy palm on his shoulder, squeezing weakly. I beg you not to frighten my beloved with your rash actions. The vein on Charles's forehead stirred, and his hand clutched my son-in-law's jacket more and more tightly. Look for your wife not in Butova. It has come to this. Otherwise, I'll have to intervene. The ardor, you see, immediately cooled down. He raised his head to look at Charles. He was at least 30 centimeters taller than him. Nervously, with a gulp, he turned to me. If she shows up, tell her I regret what I did. Finishing his speech, John gave me another glance. Charles, with a displeased look, and left my office. I exhaled heavily, falling into my desk chair. My thoughts were immediately filled with Lisa. If John had come to my place, then my sister's parents didn't have her either. Where could she have gone? Panic came over me imperceptibly, but a gentle hand tracing patterns across the back of my palm gave me a drop of calm. Who was it? What had happened? My favorite? Charles kissed my temple and kept his warm, moist lips on my skin for a while to reassure me and let me breathe easy. He knew better than anyone how to bring me to my senses. It's all about support. I need to know that someone is there to support me, whether I'm right or wrong. I just need someone who will lend a shoulder in times of need and not leave me halfway. In the difficult times of my life. Remember Lisa, the one we met at the restaurant? My fiancé nodded approvingly. That's her husband. She showed up at my door last night barefoot, naked, a year after we last met. He kicked her out, promised to take the baby, and this morning there was no sign of her. I thought she'd gone home or gone to her parents' house, but now I'm confused as to where my sister might be. Plunged into the most negative outcomes of events lying at the bottom of my heart. The panic was building again. In my chest, she could be anywhere. She has no friends, no more relatives. Anything could have happened to her. And the worst part was that she could bring the trouble on herself. Kathy, don't worry. I'll call my contacts and we'll find her as soon as possible. Charles touched my arm and turned me toward him. I buried my nose in his broad chest and cried quietly. Throughout our relationship, I'd never shown my feelings about my family in front of him. I was always afraid of judgment on his part. Why am I so careless of the people who raised me? And why am I so reluctant to talk about my older sister? So the topic of my family was rarely broached. And if we did talk about her, I told her that everyone close to me was doing well, feeling great. I wasn't lying to her, because Charles was the closest thing to me. After a few minutes, I pulled myself together, and after seeing the man I loved that I was fine, I headed to the principal's office to ask for time off. I frantically dialed my mom's number to ask when the last time she had seen Lisa and to see if she knew what was going on between her favorite daughter and son-in-law. "Mom, hi," I whispered, trying to hide the anxiety in my voice. "Kathy, terrific. Muja." In a voice I immediately realized John brought her nervously out of my eyes, back into my head. I tried to put together the right sentence, so as not to scare my mom even more and not to set my sister up. After all, I had made a promise not to tell my parents about what happened yesterday. "Mom, is Lisa home?" I asked. "Daughter, we can't find her." She turned off her phone. John panicked. "Liam, so Mom wants to see her." Mom tried to hold on, not to cry, but I could feel her motherly heart howling with pain and incomprehension. Where is her daughter now? For a second, I wondered, what about me? Mom had never baked like this, but there was no time for that sentimentality now. So I immediately put all that nonsense out of my head. "Don't worry, Charles will get some people on it and we'll find her," I reassured my mom. The silence in the phone alarmed me. I added, "John came to see me too. I'm very worried too. Thanks for your help, Kathy." Really, Mom's voice had leveled off and she seemed to be squeezing the phrase out of her. Thanking, as Mom used to say, an ungrateful daughter. Apparently, it's not very easy. I just remained silent and dropped the call. Charles, meanwhile, was waiting for me in my office, at the same time calling his friends in the police. I told him what clothes Lisa had left with and where she might be. "We'll find her," Charles said affirmatively and offered to drive me home to my parents' house. I didn't feel like driving, and I couldn't really help them at the moment. I decided to think at home about where Lisa could go to escape her husband's tyranny and threw off my heavy winter coat. I went straight to the kitchen. My stomach grumbled, demanding at least some food, because I hadn't eaten or drunk anything since last night except tea, which I'd fallen asleep with. Cut myself a salad. I proceeded to eat, at the same time contemplating my sister's act. She'd run away from life, from cheating, from her parents. But she would never run away from her own child, leaving it in the care of John. The act was justified only because her husband's tyranny had driven her to a nervous breakdown. Yesterday she had acted distant, as if pondering what could save her from all that was happening. A memory flashed through her mind. "Daddy, I love him, don't I?" shouted Lisa, hiding behind my skinny back, standing right between the two lights of the disco with the bandit. Some people call it love. My father took a swing at my sister, so we both reflexively pressed against each other. "You're not even 18 yet, and you're already here and loving me, you say?" Lisa, embittered, glared at Dad, turned around and left the apartment, slamming the door. I, grabbing my jacket off the rack, rushed after her. The pouring rain prevented me from seeing her silhouette in the darkness. I stumbled but kept running, hoping to stop my sister. I couldn't let her walk around alone at night in this cold, rainy weather. Lisa shrieked as I entered an abandoned, dilapidated building not far from our house. Echoes echoed throughout the room. Already soggy yellow leaves lay on the floor. The bricks impeded forward movement, and the hum of the birds scared the hell out of me. Walking a little farther, I noticed a shadow sitting on the windowsill, resting its nose in my lap. Lisa shouted again to get her older sister's attention. "It's cold here. Let's go home." The girl raised her head silently, and I came closer and threw the jacket I had taken over her shoulders. We sat in the dark, and only the light of a street lamp in the next street gave us some illumination. The silence was soothing, thoughts felt. The fresh, cold air gave us a chance to breathe. My sister quietly rested her head on my shoulder and sobbed. "Don't tell anyone about this place." I, fleeing here from the pain, whispered to Lisa and continued to stare into the darkness. I immediately jumped up from the table and started rushing around the kitchen. Is she really there in the winter? I asked myself. My sister hid there from pain, from family, from judgment. And most likely, she remembered this place at such a difficult moment for her. Grabbing my phone, I immediately called Charles and asked him to take me to the place, making him promise not to tell anyone about it. Even after 13 years, I wished I could keep that little big sister secret. We drove at breakneck speed, outrunning the cars ahead of us. Charles pressed the gas to the floor, recognizing that we might find my Lisa. "You asked confidently." Charles took my hand and gave me a warm look. I nodded and squeezed his fingers in my palm. As I drove up to the ruined building, my heart sank. I was afraid to see the worst possible outcome there. Afraid that my sister might have done something irreversible. "I'll do it myself," I told Charles, stopping him just before the entrance. Walking down the familiar path, I froze, hoping for the best. Turning in the right direction, I exhaled with ease. Lisa was sitting on the very windowsill by the cats in the play she had apparently taken from my house. I walked quietly over to her so as not to startle her with my presence, sat down next to her, and gave her a sisterly hug around the shoulders. She knew I was coming. She felt it, so she wasn't the least bit afraid. "For so many years I humiliated you, always telling you that you wouldn't be happy because of your soft nature. Mocked you." Her tear-red eyes rose guiltily at me. "But only you came for me. Me, your sister Lisa." The veil slowly made my pupils. "I will always be there for you, even when you can't see it." She clutched her frost-dried hands into my coat and cried quietly. It wasn't as hysterical as yesterday, but it too was full of pain and fear. I ran my hand through her blonde hair, pulling her close to me. Pearls of tears dripped from my eyes, coating the plaid with wet spots. My sister didn't push away, only harder. The two strong-spirited women outside, showing their hatred for each other, sat and cried together, helping to heal, to shake the drops off their cheeks. I turned to my sister. "Come, I'll take you to my place. You get back to normal, and we'll go through with the divorce and pick up Liam. Thanks for your help. I've really missed you all these years," thankfully giving me a smile. Lisa rose from the cold surface. We headed to the car, where an excited Charles was obediently waiting for me. Seeing me and my sister, who was in a not-so-good state, he nodded understandingly and silently opened the door for my sister. We drove in silence, listening to the radio at minimum volume, so as not to disturb the already sleeping Lisa in the back seat. I turned occasionally and looked at my sister warmly. No matter how much we fight or what we say to each other, we are sisters, and our bond is unbreakable, even through a dozen years from driving us and going home. "Rest. Did you do a lot to help me find her too?" I whispered, so as not to wake Lisa. "You're welcome. She's part of my future family after all." Charles smiled and kissed the back of my palm. I blushed angrily and gave him a look full of love and gratitude for everything he'd done for me. We walked into the house with Lisa, and she immediately went to rest. She wanted to go see her son, but I assured her that he was fine. After texting my mom that Lisa was fine and she was with me, I decided to rest too. I ran a bath, prepared a glass of white wine that was left over from my birthday party. I turned on a movie and started to enjoy the atmosphere. I was finally able to fully relax and feel light for the last 2 days. The water was dyed a soft pink color from the bath bomb I had used. The lather enveloped my feet, and I enjoyed watching the action of the movie. Again, that annoying ringing of the phone broke the idyll I was in. Christina popped up on the screen as the director called. Immediately, bad thoughts arise in my head. Wiping my hands on a towel, I answered the call. "Kathy, we have an emergency." The excited voice of the headmistress scared me terribly. "What's happened?" "Vahan is in the hospital, in intensive care. His psychologist-to-be mother is here, away on family business. There's a whole mess going on." The tone was getting louder. In the background could be heard a woman's terrified scream and voices trying to calm her down. "I'll be there soon," I replied and ran to pack in a hurry. I had to wait longer than usual for a cab. My head was wet. The wind was blowing in my ears. I froze to the bone while I waited for the car in the driveway. I raced to the orphanage. Without even taking off my outerwear, I ran to Christina's office. "Tell me, what hospital is he in?" "He's my son," shouted Emily, grabbing our principal by the blouse. Even looked as scared as possible. "Emily, get a hold of yourself. We're going to sort this out now," I interjected into the furious woman's monologue. She was crying and screaming at the same time. She shifted her already tired, heavy look at me and sank down on a chair. "We will go to the hospital together with you now, but on one condition." The woman listened to me attentively, and as soon as I told her about a possible meeting with him, she literally lit up. "I'll talk to the doctor. But you must understand the adoption papers are not ready yet, and you are not yet his full parent. The closest people are usually allowed in the NICU, so I'll do what I can," I concluded. "Encourage Emily." She nodded. I asked her to wait for me outside the office for just a few minutes. After learning all the details of Safin's case, we went to the hospital together with the expectant mother. The woman sitting behind the wheel of her car looked confused. Her eyes were staring into the void. Her hands were shaking and her heart was clearly bleeding. Vahan was not her blood child, though, and she had wanted to take him away long past the age of an infant. Emily loved this venturesome, cheerful little boy with all her soul, and Ilyusha, always hearing her voice, ran from the farthest room into the hall to chat with his mother for a minute. With each meeting, they grew warmer and warmer toward each other. The love grew, and so did the affection. So it was very hard to look at a depressed Emily, who had just found happiness and was afraid of losing it again. He would be fine. I supported the woman. Elisi died when he was 8, just like Ilyusha. Emily suddenly spoke. "If the same thing happens to me that happened 7 years ago, I will not forgive myself. You didn't mention this moment when you applied for adoption." I answered, looking into the woman's face. "Mentally, I'm completely healthy, and I don't see any similarities between him and my late son. I just want to feel like a mother again and give this beautiful boy a better future." She slowed down, giving such details. "I'm afraid my heart can't take another loss this serious. Kathy, I want to love and be loved." I nodded understandingly and stroked the woman's shoulder. She waved the tears from her cheeks and fixed her quail strands that were getting in the way on the road. When we reached the hospital, we went straight to the medic who had left in the ambulance with Safina. "Sophia, how is he?" I asked, addressing a young girl sitting near the entrance to the intensive care unit. The doctor said he would only talk to higher-ups. He didn't tell me anything. Sophia lowered her head guiltily, occasionally sobbing. Leaving Emily with the nurse, I found the doctor and he led me to his office. "The boy has had a serious poisoning. He's fine now, but if he suddenly worsens, I'll have to go to the police," the doctor concluded. "Where in your facility could a child find alcohol?" "What? What are you talking about?" My eyes widened in surprise. He had over half a liter of hard liquor in his system. The child drank it in one gulp. "What caused the poisoning?" "For his age, it's almost a lethal dose," the doctor replied, looking at me unhappily. "And I heard you. We will deal with this situation. The boy is not easy, always found adventure. What could possibly go into his head?" I answered confidently, hiding my shaking hands under the table. "His foster mom can see him. His adoption papers are being processed. I can't present them right now. But if he meets with his mom, he'll obviously feel better. He shouldn't be nervous or moving for more than 3 minutes. He's conscious, but he's in serious condition. For his age, a nurse will see you out. Tell me, did Filatov authorize it?" Disgruntled doctor threw and again ducked into a pile of papers on his desk, and I thanked him and hurried to rejoice Emily. Soon the woman was escorted to the boy, and I stayed behind to wait for her. Remembering the wonderful 15 minutes of quiet time I'd had in the bathroom brought a warmth to me. I too was worried about Ilyusha, and the woman's life situation touched me too. But I wondered if anyone was wondering what was going on inside me and worrying about something joyful for me. Emily came out of the room and came straight to me. "Kathy, thank you so much for your help. If it wasn't for you, I would be torturing myself with scary and frightening thoughts. But I am now 100% sure that my baby will live, Without a moment's hesitation, the woman took me into her arms. I reciprocated and wished her son a speedy recovery. Sophia, having finally learned about the baby's condition, went home, and Emily decided to drive her. I hope I get credit for this, she chuckled to herself. I headed outside, putting my hand in my pocket. I frowned, fumbling for a piece of paper. Unfolding the piece of paper, I smiled. It was the address of the very nice grandma from the trolley bus. Looking at my watch, I decided to visit her and thus free my thoughts from the negativity that had accumulated over the past few days. I knocked meekly on the door, waiting for my landlady. The door was opened by a stately man, probably a little older than Camille. He looked at me perplexed and later asked, "Who don't believe in God? We're not buying vacuum cleaners." "Excuse me, I'm here to see Camille." An old lady looked out of the man and immediately broke into a smile. She owed me a mug of tea. "Kathy, you made it," exclaimed the woman from the food man aside, thereby throwing him out of his stupor. She gave me a motherly hug and motioned for me to come in. "This is Kathy. Remember I told you I rode in the trolley. She was the one who protected me," Camille said proudly, helping me take off my coat. Grandpa hesitated at first, but later he smiled too and extended his hand to introduce me. "I'm Kevin." The nice man led me into the kitchen and put the kettle on. Camille, on the other hand, started to take out cookies, nuts, and jam. I felt at ease and chatted happily with Kevin while his wife set the table. "So you're an educator too?" The man spoke excitedly as soon as he learned that I had studied at a teacher training university. "My Camille is also a teacher. She used to teach Russian. Really, it was my favorite subject in school," I exclaimed, eating the pie Camille had given me. We chatted nonstop, discussing every possible topic. The old woman was pouring and already on his third mug, and our conversations did not end. "Do you already have children?" the woman asked, looking at me without any shyness. I waved my head negatively. "We have only a son, and that too from an orphanage, but ours." There was an awkward silence in the air. I decided to lighten the mood. "Mom didn't give birth like that, but brought him up like that." I took the woman's hand and stroked the back of it with my other hand. She smiled. We didn't bring up the subject of children again, but there was still a little tension. Seeing through the window that it was already dark outside, I decided I should head home. Lisa had probably come to her senses by now, and Charles was ripping off my phone because I had set it to silent in mode. "Thank you, Kevin and Camille. You helped me out. I feel better after sitting with you guys." I hugged those nice people and headed for the bus stop. After dialing Charles' number, I waited for an answer. "I've called you 15 times, Kathy 15. Charles' voice was rather gruff, but excited at the same time. I put the phone on silent. A kid was hospitalized at work. I replied guiltily, "I'm sorry." Charles stammered a cough and answered I didn't realize that something serious had happened. I was really worried. "I understand. I think about you a lot." A ridiculous silence formed after these words. "I miss you. I love you too." His velvet voice made me smile. "I love you and hope to see you soon." "I love you," I replied and reluctantly hung up the phone. As I got on the trolleybus, I fell asleep instantly, forgetting all my problems. When I woke up 2 stops before my stop, I put on my hood and waited for the transportation to slow down. The house smelled like childhood. Taking off my coat, I walked into the kitchen and found my sister in there, diligently chopping vegetables while dancing to the music on the speaker. "You're back. Where have you been? Did you leave the bathtub with water?" Lisa asked. A smile was visible on her face. The beauty had gone from her eyes, and she looked quite awake. "It smells. Here are the horns," I said, walking to the table. "I had things to do. Didn't get into it at work. I see you're feeling better." I made up with my favorite sister. "Soon, getting rid of the tyrant husband. What could be better, my dear?" Laughing, Lisa replied, putting the ingredients for the salad into a bowl. Thought I'd treat myself to your favorite food. Saw cottage cheese in the fridge, so I made some rusks. Are you happy? I nodded without further ado and pulled my arms around the girl. For a tight hug, she came over, and we were reunited. Just like when we were kids, to old songs and the smell of cotton candy wafting through the apartment. We lost track of time, chatted nonstop, remembering the past and telling the present. In my sister's eyes burned the very fire that John had once extinguished in them. I left the Waddles, drinking my tea, and listened intently to my sister. She was excitedly telling me how her son was growing up, how he resembled me as a child, how she missed me in the difficult moments of her life, despite her attitude toward me in the past. I was glad that this particular person had come back into my life somewhere in the back of my mind. My inner child cried tears of joy that at 28 years old, he had found a big sister. Lissa looked back at my facial features with admiration, occasionally touching my hair. She saw herself in me. And though we weren't alike in personality, we were insanely similar in appearance. Dark as coal, hair as thick as coal, beautiful eyebrows and brown eyes like the core of a planet that you wanted to drown in. We achieved each other's love, which we were very happy about. Now at 2 o'clock in the kitchen, drinking tea together, I woke up to movement next to me. Lisa turning in different directions, almost pushing me out of bed. I lost my eyes and stared at the clock 7:30 in the morning. There was literally half an hour left to sleep, but I decided not to tease my body and grudgingly swore by the bathtub. Even at this early hour, nothing could spoil my mood. I took a shower, did the necessary facials, and decided to curl my thick black hair. After half an hour of torture, I had a charming style on my head. I could wear it to a wedding. I heard behind me. A sleepy Lisa was smiling in the doorway, looking at me. Oh, come on. I laughed, applying balm to my lips. I have to be irresistible at a wedding. I always do. My sister gently ran her hand over my back and went to take a shower. After packing, I went to work, while sending a good morning message to my favorite man. Yesterday, I felt ashamed for forgetting about him and making him worry in hopes that today would pass without incident. I was thinking about having a romantic dinner with Charles this evening. Walking into work, I received tons of compliments on my hair filled with color. I headed to my office. There was the most unexpected surprise waiting for me that I never imagined. "Noah, what are you doing here?" I asked in surprise, staying close to the door. "It's good to see you too, Kathy." The man smiled wryly and walked over to me. "I'm not. Why did you come here?" Shaking hands betrayed my indignation at that. I took a step back. My first, but also my hardest love, the one I'd spent years trying to forget, was sitting in my office, sprawled on a chair in a masterly manner. It's been 7 years since we last met, and on that fateful day I hoped I'd never see his smug face again. But fate thought otherwise. Don't be afraid. I came not to Kathy, who was head over heels in love with me, but to the head of Kathy's orphanage. His grin never left his lips even now. For as long as I could remember, he'd always been such a narcissistic, arrogant kid. But I guess he'd gotten a hold of me in my 20s, and our breakup was torture for me. "What you need?" I took off my coat and snapped at him. "You haven't changed a bit. You're still beautiful, slender, bold." Noah gave me an animalistic look and smiled. Noticing my glare, he continued, "My wife has a soft spot for kids without families. I'd like to sponsor your institution. 3rd floor, 2nd door on the left. You want to see the director." Through my teeth I sneered, trying to distract myself, and looked at the personal files on my desk. "And they said that sponsors are handled by you, especially Vance." Hearing the last name of my favorite person out of his mouth, my fists clenched involuntarily. I jumped up from my seat and pointed my finger at the door. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. My thoughts are all jumbled up. I don't know what I'm saying." Bracker hesitated, throwing me into a stupor. I've never seen him so lost. A moment ago, his sneers and chuckles filled the office, But now his confidence was gone. "My wife is dying," the man blurted out. He touched every object on my desk to keep his hands busy. "What are you talking about?" Sitting back down, I asked. "You're supposed to know what true love is, right?" He asked sharply, raising his guilty eyes to me. I nodded. "I met her 3 years ago. She's young, confident, and her eyes are like an ocean you want to drown in." He spoke of his wife with admiration, as if she were something impossible, beyond the reach of ordinary people. 2 months ago, we found out she had cancer. Terminal brain cancer. His gray eyes filled with tears. Nerves made him drop the magnet he'd grabbed from my pencil case. She had dreamed of children, but now she asked me to give all her savings to orphanages. So I did. Now she wants me to sponsor at least one orphanage in her memory. I covered my eyes, trying not to feel the pain. What is Noah feeling right now? I didn't know what it was like to know that your love could leave you at any second. But now, looking at someone whose eyes are already tired of crying, whose hands are already down, I can see how hard it is. I want her name to hang on your wall of honor for the rest of her days, to be immortalized here. It embedded itself in my heart as well. An innocent tear fell from my eyes as I listened to Noah's story about his wife. I forgot about the pain this man had caused me. I pulled myself together and was willing to help him with the paperwork for the long-term sponsorship to make this all go faster. I will do my best to get it all set up. Go to the director and submit the paperwork as soon as possible, and leave me a picture and your wife's information. All funds coming from you will be recorded in her name, I concluded. I hope for the best. Noah, thank you so much for your help, Kathy. He looked at me so warmly and tenderly that I wanted to support him. I walked over to my former lover and hugged him. "Hang in there," I said and looked at the man. At that moment, I realized that life could turn 360 degrees in a split second, with no way to turn back. Noah looked as if he were dead. When he talked about his beloved, even men like him can love so much that they would do anything for someone whose heart beats only for him. I immediately texted Charles about how much I loved him and was afraid of losing him. People need to know that they are loved. They need to feel it because there is no telling what will happen tomorrow. Charles immediately called me to ask what had happened. I briefly explained the situation, and he invited me to dinner that evening. Inspired by tonight's date, I continued to work. By the end of the day, I was mentally looking forward to meeting my lover. I wanted to finally embrace him, breathe in his wonderful scent, and talk to him. There was a knock at the door. Charles came in with a huge bouquet of chrysanthemums, which I love so much. "Oh my God, they're beautiful," I exclaimed, accepting the gift. "Not as pretty as you, but still." Charles smiled and kissed my cheek. I flushed and, laying the flowers on the table, threw myself into the arms of the man I loved. His scent of pine and wood drove me crazy whenever I was near him. "I missed you so much," my fiancé said quietly, pulling me close to him. "Let's go, we're late." And I, smiling with all my 32 teeth, threw on my coat and hurried happily after Charles. Once at the restaurant where Charles had reserved a table for us, I relaxed, ordering a bottle of wine and a variety of entrees. We proceeded to dinner, talking about everything in the world. He was a suave, gentle, confident man. I felt safe with him. When we are together in an informal setting, I always feel sleepy, which means I have the right person with me. Charles is the one who will follow me wherever I go, support me whenever I go, and help me wherever I go. Our love grows stronger every day, even when we don't see each other. I feel it subconsciously. Charles raised his blue eyes to me, and I froze. "I proposed to you so long ago. Maybe it's time to get serious," Charles asked. Why did I hesitate? "What are you talking about?" I asked back. "Tomorrow's a day off. I'm going to my parents. Maybe you can visit them with me." Charles looked in my eyes for agreement, but all he saw was wine. "I'm sorry, I'd love to." "Really?" I was silent. He was still waiting for me to continue. "I want to deal with my sister and brother-in-law, do the paperwork, and wait for Vaughn to be discharged. I feel responsible for all of this. I want to go to your family with a pure heart. But that's obviously not right now. Charles nodded understandingly, but at the same time resentfully, and continued eating his steak. After a couple minutes of silence, he did speak. You always think of others first. When are you going to start thinking about yourself? I was running out of time, appearing as a piece of beef. When I heard those words, I knew that Charles was right now more than anyone else. But I couldn't abandon my sister to her fate. I promised to help her with her divorce and her son. The story of Vaughn and his mother is also a sad one. And my happiness is probably not as important as their grief. It's the same situation with Bracker. I was afraid to lift my head and look into my fiance's face, because he's waiting for me to be ready to meet his family so he can start preparing for the wedding. And I, with my overly kind heart, am doing anything but my personal life. I'm sorry, Charles, but that's who I am. I take responsibility for what I do. After finishing my glass of wine, I grabbed my purse and left the room without saying goodbye. The frost was getting colder, and I wanted to wait for the trolley. But I decided it would be more comfortable and faster to take a cab. Charles took his time getting out to stop me. He knew I needed to cool down and be alone with my thoughts. When I turned around, I saw a familiar figure standing at the entrance to the restaurant I'd just left. "Mom," I shouted, hoping my eyesight was failing me. My mom, dressed in a gorgeous burgundy dress and brown mink coat, was chatting sweetly with a man unknown to me. She turned around startled at my voice, and as soon as she saw me, she grabbed her conversation partner under the arm and walked into the establishment. I waved my head, referring to my inebriated mind, and I thought I had imagined it. The cab stopped, and I deftly jumped into the car. I give you my address. When I got home, I didn't find my sister. A puzzle was forming in my head. I frantically dialed my sister's number and paced around the apartment, waiting for her to answer. "Lisa, hi. Where are you?" I asked. My mom called, asking me to come over. She had to leave on business. "Don't worry, I'm fine," my sister replied. In the background, I heard my father's laughter and Liam's children's voices. "Is Mom okay?" Abruptly, I spoke up. Sister only said they were fine and invited me to visit, which I declined. Again, a pile of questions. Why was Mom at that restaurant? Did Dad know what she was doing there? And who was that mysterious man next to her? My temples were burning. The feeling of my brain melting wouldn't leave me. I was nervous. I couldn't find my place. I didn't even know what it was that was making me question myself so much. Cheating is my biggest fear. But cheating on your mother with your father is worse than if it happened to me. I couldn't take it any further, so I called my mom. "Mom, good evening." My voice sounded pretty rough. "Hello, daughter." My mom's gentle voice alarmed me. The last time she had called me daughter was over 15 years ago, not counting the latest situation involving Lisa's disappearance. "Where are you now? Can we meet?" I decided to ask the question right up front. "I can come to your place after the big meeting." My mom threw me the text address and immediately disconnected. I looked at the faded screen and waved my head. "No way," I said to myself. She hadn't been to my house once since I'd moved away from them. I hurriedly texted the address to my mom and waited for her almost at the front door. Charles hadn't called, but I was worried about him, even though it wasn't a good time. So much had happened in the last few days that my head was bursting with trying to find answers to all the questions in it. More than an hour and a half passed, and still I sat in the kitchen waiting for my mother. The doorbell rang, and I ran to open the burgundy dress, and brown fur coat in my heart unpleasantly shook, and I became even more nervous than before. "Come in," I said dryly and moved toward the kitchen. Mom took off her outer garments without a trace of shame, and I noticed how deep her cleavage was. "At such an advanced age, I know what you want to talk to me about." Mom sat down across from me, not even bothering to hug her daughter. "No matter how I feel about my father, he's still my father." "How can you do that?" I raised my tone sharply without breaking eye contact with my mother. "You should have listened first," risked my mother's stern voice. I slowly lowered myself into the chair and raised my eyebrows questioningly. "Your father has huge debts with nothing to pay," Mom concluded, watching my reaction. This meeting at the restaurant could cover them once and for all. I rounded my eyes and didn't even know what to say to that. I didn't want to know what exactly Mom was up to, but I wanted to get this masquerade over with as soon as possible. "The amount of the debt," I blurted out, not waiting for the story to continue. Mom looked at me in surprise. $1,500. The woman cut me off, as if to tell me, "How can you help me? I'll give you this money, and you finish your meetings with strange men." My nerves were fraying, my palms were sweating, and I wanted to get rid of company like my mother. She didn't comment on my words in any way, but I could see on her face that she was dumbfounded as much as I was. I walked to the bedroom and pulled an envelope called "wedding" from the nightstand. I had been saving money for it, knowing Charles was rich, but I wanted to contribute to our shared event. Holding out exactly $1,500 to my mother, I spoke. "Tell your father the relatives helped or sold some gold. Don't say I gave it." Mom's eyes glistened and she lowered her head. Something inside her ached. Seeing the mother crying, even a mother like that, is very hard. I wanted to hug her, kiss her, and tell her that I still loved her. But my pride was greater than my weakness in front of my loved ones, especially when they care so much about you and your family. "Thank you for your help, daughter," my mom whispered and looked guiltily into my eyes. She left my abode. I slowly slid down the wall to the floor and cried. I couldn't stop mine. The tears came. There was a lump in my throat. My head was bursting with migraines. She left without just saying thank you, without asking how I was, without asking what was wrong with me, without telling me how much she missed me, how much she loved the one she used to walk around like that as a child. Or Layla. I was ready to scream from that one, but I was also aching inside from the reanimated wounds inside that my own mother had inflicted on me. I had emptied myself completely over the last week of my life. My mind began to leave me, my body, and I lost consciousness. Waking up from the sunlight, I didn't realize where I was at first. Then, coming to my senses, I looked around. My head was still splitting open. Drinking a painkiller, I cleaned myself up and decided to distract myself from bad thoughts with work. There was no desire to communicate with anyone, and after just checking Messenger for messages, I pulled out my laptop to check the archive of old Fosters. Christina had instructed me to look for a child named Charles, and I set about checking the personnel files that we had only recently converted to electronic form. My eyes were blind, but I kept searching lest I fall asleep and think of those who were not thinking of me at all. Nervously flipping through my files, I caught a glimpse of a familiar birth date, 17080. I smiled, remembering Charles. I took a picture of the boy's file. I moved on again, but something told me to go back. The boy with the same birth date as my future spouse was also named Charles. There was no information about his family. The only thing listed was future guardians Vance and Vance P.W. My eyes rounded. I couldn't believe what I was seeing right now. Charles had never talked about the fact that he was an orphan, but the odds of him not knowing about it were very high. Could it have been a mere coincidence? Yes, but my gut told me it wasn't. I didn't know what I would do if I withheld such information from my loved one. It would be a lie, which I hate so much. But on the other hand, only parents should be told about such things. My principles won out, and I quickly called Charles, asking him to come to me right away. He didn't even ask any questions, said he was on his way, and hung up. I hastily prepared a light lunch to feed Charles, and then I frantically waited for him. The last few hours of waiting have been torture for me. Another bout of severe headaches knocked me out. There was a knock at the door, and later Charles came in, asking why the door was unlocked. Apparently, in my condition yesterday, I had forgotten to lock it after my mom came in. "Charles, I'm sorry for leaving last night. I wasn't myself. I had so much on my mind, I said, but Charles held me close, kissing me gently on the top of my head. I'm ready to love you any way you want, impulsive, angry, funny, sad, kind, responsible, working. Charles whispered quietly, I will hold our love for both of us. When will it be hard for you? I guiltily raised my eyes to the man and asked him to sit down. He obeyed and sat down on the bed. You look worried. Did something happen again? My lover asked, looking around the room, which was in chaos. I slowly turned the laptop screen toward him and asked him to read the data, warning him not to take it personally right away. What did Charles ask after reading the personnel file of one Charles? Who is this? And why my parents' records? Charles, I could be wrong. But the date of birth and the family of the guardians, I blurted out, feeling the tension in the air in one breath. It could be someone else, but I couldn't keep a find like that from you. I sat next to him and wrapped my skinny arms around his broad back. He kissed the back of my palms, without taking his eyes off the monitor. Through several layers of clothing, I felt his body throbbing with heat, his skin covered in a thin layer of goosebumps. I wanted to take all the excitement and worry away, so he wouldn't feel what he was feeling at the moment. In an instant, he pulled out his phone, took a picture of his personal file, and jumped up abruptly from the bed. I'll come see you as soon as I meet my family. I love you. Charles gritted his teeth and walked out of the apartment, slamming the door. I panicked and subconsciously blamed myself for my lover's condition. There was no telling how this situation would turn out. Living for over 30 years, considering people as your parents, and then suddenly finding out that you were taken from an orphanage. Once again, one of the hardest days of my life has come. What else did fate have in store for me? My hands itched to call Charles and tell him it was a mistake, that it couldn't be. But he was already rushing to his family to find out the truth. The unknown is the most frightening of all. So I sat on pins and needles until 2 o'clock, waiting for news from Vance. The door opened and Charles walked in. Every lost person in the world. My cheeks burned with frost. Looking down, I noticed the wound on his arm was bleeding as well. What happened? I ran up to my lover and grabbed his wrist sharply. The blood was dripping and the wound looked bleak. Charles didn't say anything, just sat on the bed and breathed heavily. I fetched the first aid kit and began to treat the cut. It was pointless to ask Vance anything right now. He was as if in a trance, trying to understand himself, to answer the worrying questions in his head. I was close by and morally tried to give support to the one who always helped me in difficult moments. At one point, Charles turned to me and whispered softly, "Is it true?" I couldn't find the right words to answer, so I just hugged him tightly so that he could feel how much I cared about him. He nuzzled his nose into my neck, sobbing occasionally. At that age, it's hard to realize what your family has kept from you for years. Maybe if it wasn't for me, it would never have come out, and it made me feel guilty. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Charles looked at me in surprise, saying, "What does this have to do with you?" But I was the one who found the file and told you. It's not your fault, Kathy. Would they ever tell, or would I ever find out for myself? Lies always come to light, concluded my future husband, and waved a sail in the lease on his cheek. He'd always been strong, never showing emotion. But now he is in front of me so defenseless, needing a hug and someone to listen and give advice. Are they your family? Anyway, I said, hoping that he would forgive his parents and move on with his life. It will be hard for me at first, but I have forgiven them. They raised me, brought me up to be a good person, and never gave me a reason to doubt their love. My lover's eyes lit up. Apparently, pleasant childhood memories of my mother and father surfaced in his mind. We sat like that, discussing his childhood until very late in the evening. Once again, one of the most difficult days of my life. Again, a storm of emotions, both negative and positive. We fell asleep with Charles right in our clothes, next to each other, holding each other tightly against each other. 2 weeks later, I was showing off in front of the mirror, trying on different dresses that Emily had prepared. She was a good designer, and as a thank you for helping me with it at the hospital, she offered a choice of dresses I could borrow from her. "Mom, it's dark blue. It fits perfectly." I turned 360 degrees so everyone could see what this gorgeous dress looked like. "I'm wearing it." Mom looked at me warmly and nodded in approval. Once a lawyer, I knew helped Lisa divorce John and Sue Liam. Relations in our family improved. Mom started calling me for evening tea parties. We grew closer, and our hatred between us slowly faded. I've probably forgiven her for treating me that way. I grew up, realized my mistakes, and my mother realized hers. We became one big friendly family, and it was time to introduce my family to Charles, the closest person to me. We were preparing for his arrival. I was hesitant, and Lisa and Mom were setting the festive table. Dad was wiping down his sports awards from his youth to show them off to his future son-in-law. He looked at me guiltily, sometimes as if he wanted to say something, but didn't dare. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked him as I walked into the living room. He turned away abruptly and rubbed the goblet harder, ignoring me. I turned to him again. "Daddy, daughter," Daddy said quietly, coming toward me. "Forgive me for everything, and thank you for the money." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. I had hoped Mom would hide the fact that she had given me the money for the debt. "I'm in favor of Meshkov." I only nodded. Dad smiled and kissed me gently on the cheek. "Be happy," said the gray-haired man, and went on with his business. A slight anxiety was building up inside. Excitement made my stomach churn, and my palms sweated with nerves. Charles should have arrived by now, so everyone was ready for him. Lisa wasn't worried, since she had already seen him and called him occasionally. Dad had the easiest time, since he's the head of the family. The doorbell rang throughout the house, causing the whole family to line up at the entrance. Charles, dressed in a chic dark blue suit, a tee with a black overcoat thrown on top, walked in with 3 large bouquets of red roses and a small bag. My mom awed, and my sister's eyes sparkled. I just smiled gently and kissed the man on the cheek, helped him take off his coat, and gave everyone his snow-white smile. He handed a bouquet of flowers to each woman and shook my father's hand. I was beyond happy as my dad chatted sweetly with Charles, finding a common topic of discussion. Liam was running around the room playing with a new toy given to him by his future uncle. The day I found my family and was finally able to introduce them to the man I loved. Charles admired Mom's pie and complimented his sister's salads. Occasionally, he would cast me a look of tenderness and love and laugh at Liam falling. I wondered what kind of father my future husband would be. He would be the most caring, sensitive, responsible parent. And I don't regret one bit that I accepted Charles' proposal. I will remember this cozy, warm family dinner for the rest of my life. After saying goodbye to the family, Charles and I left the apartment and headed for the car. "You have a beautiful family," Vance said with a smile. "I'm glad this evening went well." Leaving a wet kiss on Charles' cheek, we moved forward. After discussing the event, Charles drove me home and went to his family to let them know that he would be bringing his fiancée to meet them next week. The subject of the orphanage was simplified and safely forgotten, which I was glad about. No longer did this mystery hold the heart of my father and mother, and Charles felt at ease. Once in my apartment, I finally lay down. My legs had been buzzing since the morning. I ran errands, grocery shopping for dinner, shopping for dresses, and helping Mom and Lisa with the cooking. Staring up at the ceiling, I wondered about the future. What would happen next? After meeting his parents, I would have to start preparing for the wedding. Knowing the status of my fiancée, a wedding can't be simple and inconspicuous. Charles said he wanted to show the world whose heart he could win, which made me very uncomfortable. Rather, I should be proud that my husband will be Charles Vance himself, a man whose name is on the lips of every second and in the thoughts of every third. But soon he will be my husband, the father of our children, and the head of our family. I want to have 3 children, a boy and two beautiful girls, so that they will take the best qualities from both of us. To be as beautiful as Charles and as kind as me. My smile stretched on its own as I thought of my future family. Before I knew it, over an hour had passed. I had showered and lay in a clean, fresh bed, happily closing my eyes in anticipation of tomorrow. The alarm clock, which had been ringing nonstop for over 5 minutes, made me get out of bed. Finding myself in the bathroom near the mirror, I was horrified. My face was covered in pigmented spots that I didn't know where they had come from. As a child, I had only been allergic to lilies. But knowing this, I never bought anything even scented with these flowers, so as not to be covered with strange spots. In a panic, I went to the kitchen to take my medicine, and on the table I found a huge bouquet of white lilies. A note lay nearby. The question that arose in my mind was who and how could have gotten into my apartment while I was asleep. Opening the note, the puzzle in my head came together. I thank you for what you did for me and my wife. Sincerely, Noah Bracker. That asshole still has the keys to my apartment. There's no other explanation for those flowers. He didn't even know I was allergic, so he brought this particular bouquet. I smiled inwardly. I was glad that his wife was pleased with her husband's act and that I had once again done a good deed gratuitously. But I still called Noah and asked him to get rid of the key to my apartment and thanked him for such a wonderful surprise. After a drink of anti-allergen and pills, I put the gift away on the windowsill and started to get ready for work. The spots from my face were slowly going away, but not completely, from having flowers in my apartment. Going outside, I felt a nice breeze and breathed in a full lungful of fresh, cold air. Going to work, I greeted my colleagues and decided to spend half an hour with the kids. Each of them dreamed of a family, a mother's caress, and a father's guidance. They were still small, but because they were here in the orphanage, they understand many hardships of life from early childhood. They know what it is like to be left alone without support, without a mother who can protect, without a home where it is always cozy and warm. When I first got a job here, being very young, having just graduated from university, I cried almost every working day, suffering from pain for these little angels. I wanted to hug each one. I wanted to take them all home and raise them as my own children. But unfortunately, it was impossible. Here, either you are lucky and you get into a good family, or you grow up here until adulthood, and then you are released into free flight, and you are left all alone in this hard adult world. The sweet girl came up to me and looked at me with her light blue eyes. They were uncannily similar to Charles' eyes, which made me run my hand gently through her hair. She was barely 4, but her demeanor was much older. She only cried when she was really hurting physically, never got cranky, dressed herself, and tried to always help other children when needed. "Kathy, you look like my mom," Eve pronounced. Taking a seat next to me on the bench, I hesitated and wondered, because she came to us as a baby and can't remember her parents. "Do you remember her?" I asked. "No, but I feel that you look alike," the girl answered and smiled radiantly. I smiled back and thought about it. Going to my office, I was still thinking about the words of this clever little girl. Once I got to work, those thoughts left me, and I began to study the documents. Christina visited my office a couple of times during the day, informing me that there was an event for sponsors coming up, and I needed to contact them and arrange a meeting for the next few weeks. After calling everyone who sponsored our orphanage, the last person I called was Charles. "Beloved," I said as soon as my future spouse picked up the phone. "Hello," answered the man on the other end of the line. "How are you?" "I'm fine. I wanted to let you know that there is an event coming up, and you need to come over next Thursday to discuss the upcoming party," I cheerfully informed him. "Okay, I'll be there. Don't forget that we are going to my parents' house this Saturday." Charles' voice was as gentle as ever. I said I remembered everything. We said goodbye and I dropped the call. That Saturday, Lisa helped curl my hair while telling me how much Liam liked the girl from daycare. After her divorce from John, It was as if my sister had been reborn. Her eyes glistened with happiness. She felt alive. She found a job to her liking. She dressed much better than before. And she often came to my house to gossip and eat her special dry goods. I was happy to see her sister blossom. After all, if she's happy, and so am I. Lisa picked out a beautiful light-colored dress for me to match my beige-heeled shoes. I was almost ready and was waiting for Charles to pick me up. As soon as I thought of him, he called, "Kathy, I'm sorry. There was a force majeure at work. I won't be able to pick you up in time. Take a cab. I texted you the address. I'll meet you at the house." Vance assured me and hung up immediately. I thought something serious had happened, so I didn't get mad at my lover, telling my sister that I'd have to drive myself. She became agitated. I assured her that I would be fine and saw her off safely. Once I was home alone, I began to panic because meeting his parents had been planned for so long, and I was only doing it now. Thoughts of my mother-in-law not liking me filled my head. Especially after the incident with Charles' papers from the orphanage, her attitude toward me had worsened. That's what I thought. Putting on my coat and shawl, I was about to go out to catch a cab. But looking at the time, I realized that I would get there much earlier than Charles. So I decided to take the trolleybus to pass the time and think about my future meeting. I grabbed a bouquet of paper-wrapped flowers and left the apartment. Outside, it was slowly starting to warm up with the arrival of spring, but the snow was still lying, and the evening frost burned my cheeks. When I reached the bus stop, I saw a familiar face. Camille asked me in surprise. The woman turned around and reached out to me with a hug. I hugged the old woman gently, and we started talking. We also got on the trolleybus together and chatted the whole way, occasionally glancing out the window so we wouldn't miss our stop. "I'll get off here. I need to buy a cake for tea at the bakery. See you later, daughter," said Camille, and went to the conductor to pay the fare. Just a couple of minutes later, the voice of the trolleybus worker sounded disgruntled. She was aggressively trying to explain something to an old lady I knew. Not thinking long, I approached them and stood between Camille and the conductor. "Is there a problem?" I asked, looking at the woman in uniform. "The grandmother doesn't have her pension card with her." "Does she want a cheaper fare?" the conductor blurted out. She gives me and the woman an angry look. "Can't you tell she's a pensioner?" I said to defend Camille's point of view. The conductor's eyes widened, and she was ready to get into a verbal altercation with me. But Camille took my hand and shook her head, telling me to stop. "I pay full price," holding out a $10 bill. "Worker," I turned around and walked the old woman to the exit. The woman nodded gratefully and didn't say anything. I sat down in my seat and sighed heavily. The conductor didn't look away from me for the rest of the ride. Anger became a residue in my mind over the situation, and I fidgeted all the way until it was my turn to get off. I saw a familiar neighborhood as soon as I stepped onto the street. Camille and Kevin lived nearby. I walked slowly to the house Charles had texted me and waited dutifully in the driveway. After 5 minutes of waiting, Charles's big SUV was visible at the beginning of the yard. He got out of the car and kissed me gently on the cheek, apologizing for not being able to pick me up. "You're insanely beautiful," Charles concluded and opened the door for me to go in first. The walls of the house looked familiar, but I didn't let it show. When we got to the 4th floor, I stared at the bell, which had a little bear painted on it, just like Camille's. I tensed up. A memory flashed through my mind, but I tried not to think about it. It couldn't be what I was remembering now. Charles pressed the bell, and slow footsteps sounded outside the door. I was startled to see 2 happy yet surprised familiar faces. "Kevin," I glanced questioningly at the man, and then shifted my gaze to the woman behind him. "Camille." I immediately remembered this sweet elderly couple telling me that they had adopted a son from the orphanage. On the trolleybus today, Camille was telling me that her future daughter-in-law was coming to meet her tonight. I didn't pay any attention to that at all, even when I saw the house. I thought that Charles's parents and my elderly acquaintances lived in the same house, but I didn't even realize it was them. "Kathy, did you decide to come in for tea?" The old lady asked uncomprehendingly. Mecca with eyes from me to Charles. "Son, where is the daughter-in-law?" Charles was the most stunned of all. He couldn't understand how we could know each other and why he didn't know about it. He was silent for a split second, opening his mouth in a coughing fit. At 6, he looked at his mom. "Mom, this is my fiancée, Kathy Vysotsky. Have you two met?" inquired my future fiancé, who was still surprised. "Charles, I'll explain everything to you now," I said, standing on the threshold. Camille hesitated and later led us into the house and seated us at the table. All this time we were in awkward silence. I'm waiting. It's a fascinating story of when and how my family managed to meet my future wife without my knowledge, Charles said, and fixed his gaze on his mother. She hesitated, but as soon as she wanted to speak, I gave her a warm look and began the story myself. I had helped this nice woman on the trolley a couple weeks ago. She invited me to tea. A week later, I met Kevin. I concluded, they are insanely kind and nice people. Charles, I'm glad I'm in such a good family. We were afraid you'd end up with some backwoods girl. How lucky we are to have Kathy. The older man exclaimed, but immediately calmed down at the serious look of his wife. It must be fate, Charles said, and gave us his snow-white smile. We all laughed together at the situation that had happened to us and started dinner. Charles' parents warmly told him about me, how nice we chatted over a couple of mugs of tea, and then began to talk about my future husband's childhood. We did not do without albums with old photos, which made Charles blush at times. We had a wonderful time. Charles' mom said in confidence that if another girl had come, she would not have been able to love her. We laughed with her and continued setting the table for tea. When it got dark outside, Charles and I decided to go home. Camille thanked me for the bouquet I had given her and kissed me on the cheek as we were leaving. "I am very happy to meet you already as my future mother-in-law and father-in-law," I said, hugging Kevin. "You are our daughter now." "We are very happy too," concluded Camille. We said our goodbyes and left the prince's family to their elders. It was the most unexpected meeting that could have happened to me. In my heart, I was insanely happy that Charles' parents had turned out to be such iridescent, sweet, and kind people. Now I had no doubt that Charles was my destiny. 6 months later, my palms were sweating. I folded nervously, and a lump formed in my throat from my morning awakening. There were people walking around the militia, but I was completely oblivious to them. Right now, my thoughts were filled with nothing but Charles. I pictured him in a black tuxedo, standing at the altar with his hand outstretched. Lisa was running toward me with a bouquet of flowers. Mom was trying to put a veil in my hair, and I was sitting on the edge of the bed with no sign of life. "Sisters, what's the matter with you?" my sister asked, looking into my sad face. "I'm scared," I replied. "There are so many people there that I think I will faint as soon as I step outside this room. We're right here. Your father will walk you down the aisle. Your family is with you," Lisa concluded, stroking my hands with her warm palms. I smiled lightly and hid from my mom poking me with one of her stilettos. I was insanely grateful to my family for their support. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have been able to survive the wedding jitters. Through all the hard times in our lives, we reunited and became one big, strong family again. As I put on my wedding dress and stood on my heels, I felt a burning sensation in my lower abdomen. My shaking hands, which could not hold the bouquet of the bride, gave away my excitement. Taking a deep breath, I pulled myself together and walked out into the main hallway where my father was already waiting for me. "You're beautiful," Dad said admiringly, putting up his hand for me to take hold of. "You're gorgeous too," I whispered and smiled. We walked to the main hall filled with hundreds of guests, of which mine was no more than 50. The red carpet was shot under my feet. The silhouette of my lover could be seen in the distance. I slowly stepped onto the carpet. A beautiful tune started playing, and I tried to relax. This was my day. The day I was the queen and Charles was the king. a day where our lives, souls, and destinies were woven once and for all. I caught admiring yet envious glances from girls and women. The men looked on with nobility and wonder. Perhaps the guests from Charles' side did not expect to see someone like me next to him, but it was too late to assume anything. With my head held high, I walked down the aisle with my father at my side. Charles's eyes traveled down my face from head to toe and stopped at my veiled face. His hand reached out to me, and I boldly placed my palm in his. I could feel his excitement through the touch. He was worried as much as I was. Once on the dais, from where I could see the entire auditorium, I gasped at the number of people who were all staring at us in anticipation. Charles leaned over to me and whispered, "You are amazing. I have chosen the best woman to be my wife in my life." I was embarrassed, and my cheeks blushed. Even though no one could see it, I could feel my face burning. The registrar appeared next to us. The man looked us over and nodded approvingly at Charles. The music grew quieter. Our parents sat in the front rows, and Lisa and Charles's close friend Joe stood near us. My knees were trembling under my dress. I was very nervous and afraid that I wouldn't be able to control myself and would faint right at the wedding ceremony. Charles' hands held me so tightly that I was sure he would hold me up. The registrar began his speech, and I noticed immediately that my mom and Camille were in tears, whispering among themselves. I smiled. It was nice to see my mother-in-law and mother-in-law interacting, and they really liked each other the first time they met. "Are you ready to take Kathy as your wife?" The registrar spoke and looked at Charles. "I do," Vance answered without a trace of doubt. "Are you ready to take Charles as your husband?" The registrar exclaimed again. A lump rose in my throat, and I thought for a moment that I could not speak nervously, but I answered, nevertheless agreed. "Congratulations, you can exchange rings." Charles gently lifted my hand and placed the engraved ring on my ring finger. I felt a slight electric shock run through my body. I repeated the same motion with Charles' ring. By signing my name at that second, I lost my last name and became Vance Kathy. "Congratulations, you are now husband and wife. Can the groom kiss the bride?" The registrar exclaimed, and the gold spread throughout the room. My husband gently lifted the veil from my face and looked into my eyes. I was still in a state of shock and could not believe that all this was happening to me. "I love you," Charles said, and touched his moist lips to mine. The guests shouted bitter, and our moms were still crying with happiness. For a moment, the voices were silent, and it seemed to me that now my lover and I were all alone. My longtime dream had come true. I had found my own family with the man I loved. Breaking our kiss, I held my palm almost on my husband's cheek and said, "You are the best thing that happened to me in my whole life." The guests didn't stop applauding. The music got louder, and we went down to the families to receive congratulations. "Dear children, be happy. Long life to you and more babies," said Camille, and gave me a big hug. Then she kissed her son. Mom was still wiping tears from her cheeks and couldn't calm down. A happy Liam was running around her and tugging at her dress. "Mom, I'm getting married." "Why are you crying with laughter?" I asked. "I am so happy for you that I can't contain my emotions." Mom pecked me on the cheek and hugged me as much as she could. I stroked her on the top of her head and also hugged my dad. Lisa at the same time danced merrily with Joe, not paying attention to the people around her. Apparently, loved ones. "Did you get a look at Demon's friend?" I asked my dad. He just laughed and looked at his eldest daughter fatherly. When we all found ourselves in the banquet hall, my mood doubled. Everyone was having fun, dancing, getting to know each other, and socializing. Charles and I could not part with each other for a second. Sitting at the newlyweds table, we held hands under the table and giggled at the guests who were ridiculously performing tasks from the contests. I occasionally watched a happy Lisa, who was getting to know people now and then and trying to find common ground with everyone. Mom was chatting sweetly with her saint, and Camille couldn't take her eyes off little Liam, who was running around the table. Everything I had dreamed of had come true and was there for me. Remembering the thoughts I wanted to share with Charles, I turned toward him. "Charles, there's something I want to tell you," I mumbled, distracting him from talking to me. "I'm listening to my favorites." Smiling through all 32 teeth, Charles replied. "I've been watching this girl at the orphanage for a long time," I began to say. "She looks just like you with her eyes. One day she came up to me and told me that she felt like I looked like her mom." Charles listened to me intently and did not interrupt. "Maybe it's a sign," I said cautiously. "Beware of your husband's violent reaction." At first Charles hesitated, even frowned, but then he smiled again and said, "With you, I am ready to take even 1,000 of these blue-eyed angels." I, not holding back my emotions, shrieked and threw myself into the arms of my beloved. Hear and repent with my nose in his neck, which smelled of pine and wood. There was no limit to the joy. We adopted Eva and would later have 2 more children. Once again, I was convinced how pure and kind a soul the man I loved so much had. As Charles and I looked at each other in love, we smiled and continued to watch. That day was the happiest day of my life. I fondly remember the moments of the family and Charles. Now in our family, there are already 3 happy children and 2 equally happy parents. And the little girl adapted quickly. As soon as we got her, and 2 years later we had twins in our family. The grandmothers are happy to spend time with their grandchildren, while Charles and I are busy with work. We go to parks in the evenings, take the kids to amusement rides on weekends, and try to go on vacation in the summer. Charles is doing everything he can to give me and our children a better future, and I am so grateful to him for that. Like I said, my husband is a wonderful father, occasionally overpromising, but that happens to all men. Fatherhood first. I was sitting at work, going through sponsorship agreements, and I came across him. Memories of earlier years popped into my head, where for weeks on end, strange situations happened that put me in a stupor at the time, although thanks to this difficult period in my life, and gained a lot of things. First of all, our love with Charles has been put to a tremendous test of strength. We didn't leave each other at crossroads, supported each other no matter what happened, and stayed true to our choices no matter what. All the historical ties after 10 years only grow stronger. After all, if it weren't for my sister's divorce, Lisa and I would not have been able to become as close as we are now. Her life has turned out very well. She married her husband 3 years after we were married, and her view of the world had changed, and her relationship with her parents had only gotten better after mutual help. And if it wasn't for her, we would still be living with my mother and father on each other. The main thing is that everyone realized his mistake and took into account his attitude to others. I have realized and understood a lot of things over the years, and now I feel that I have not made a mistake anywhere. Gratitude and support is what each of us deserves.